spectral debtor. Good evening, wanderers of the night. You found yourself in the space between dreams and waking, where shadows hold secrets and silence has a voice. Tonight, we will walk through tenebrous forests, abandoned towns, ancient graves, and haunted groves. 5 tales await stories of debts unpaid, curiosity punished, eyes that watch, shadows that stalk, and trees that remember. Sit, or perhaps don't. The darkness has ears, and it knows your heartbeat. Let the stories begin. The snow had fallen since dusk, blanketing the world in a silence so thick it almost swallowed thought. Out there, beneath the jaundiced moon of Montana's winter, I could hear nothing but the soft crunch of my own boots. Even the pines seemed to hold their breath, as if afraid that one sound might wake the dead resting beneath the frost. My name's Silas Jones. Folks used to call me Lucky. I suppose that name meant something once back when I still believed in chance, in the idea that a man could bargain with fate and come out ahead. That night, walking home from the saloon of 7 Hands, pockets heavy with other men's wages, I thought the world itself might have been dealing me a good hand for once. The road wound through the old mining camp, the one folks had abandoned after the last shaft collapsed. Only a few crooked chimneys still stood, black teeth rising from the snow. The moonlight painted everything in glassy white, the kind that turns every shadow into something watching you. My breath came out in slow clouds, hanging there like ghosts who hadn't yet learned they were dead. The saloon's laughter was long behind me now, just an echo somewhere in memory, mixed with the smell of whiskey and cheap tobacco. I remember whistling, just to keep myself company. The tune came out thin and dry in the air, gambler's lullaby, something my father used to hum when the dice were rolling bad. I used to hate that song. Tonight it felt like a charm against the emptiness. There was a warmth in my coat pocket, where a silver coin rested, the coin I'd won off that poor drifter earlier that evening. He'd begged for one more round, eyes wet, hands shaking. Luck's a wheel, I'd told him, and it's my turn to spin. He didn't argue, just stared at me like I'd already been measured for a coffin. I laughed it off then, but the look stayed with me, clinging like smoke. The snow whispered against my boots. Sometimes I thought I could hear other footsteps matching mine, a half step behind. I'd stop, listen. Nothing. Only the wind curling through the trees like a slow breath. By the time I reached Widow's Crossing, the world had gone still. No animal calls, no wind now, just the ache of quiet pressing against my ears. I could see my reflection in the ice where the creek ran thinly over stone. My face looked older somehow, hollowed out. That's when I saw her. At first, she looked like nothing more than a shimmer, a line of white against the white of the road, a trick of the moon perhaps. Then she moved, slow, graceful. Her dress fluttered like smoke and water. I thought she was some lost traveler, maybe a widow heading home from church. But when she came closer, I saw she wasn't walking on the snow. She was gliding through it, and the snow didn't move beneath her. Her hair was dark, soaked black as ink, hanging over her shoulders. Her face was pale, not from the cold, but from something older, something that had never known warmth. Her eyes, I can't rightly say they were eyes at all, just 2 hollows where the light went to die. My mouth went dry. I stopped walking. The coin in my pocket felt heavy now, as if it wanted to drag me into the earth. The air turned sharp, freezing the breath right out of me. I swallowed hard and said, "Evening, ma'am," because in those days, manners still mattered even when you were afraid. She didn't answer. She just turned her head, slow as a pendulum swing, and for a second, I thought I heard whispering. 1,000 voices, low and cold, curling through the wind like smoke from a burned-out chimney. My name was in there somewhere. I swear it was. Then, in the blink of an eye, she passed me, no sound, no trace. The smell of something sweet and spoiled lingered behind her, like roses left too long on a grave. I turned, heart pounding, and saw it. No shadow stretching behind her. No footprints in the snow. Nothing. It should have ended there. I should have kept walking, crossed myself, maybe thrown that cursed coin into the drifts. But a gambler never leaves a mystery unsolved. We chase odds, even when they're bad. Especially when they're bad. I called out, "Hey, lady, you all right?" The only answer was the wind. I took a step forward, the snow crackling underfoot. Then faintly I heard it, the sound of cards being shuffled, right behind me. Soft, precise, familiar. I spun around, and the world looked exactly the same except the path behind me wasn't empty anymore. There, resting on the snow, was a single playing card, the Queen of Spades. Its edge was wet with blood. I stared at it for a long while. The blood hadn't frozen yet. It gleamed under the moon, dark and red as heart fire. My hands trembled as I bent down to pick it up, but the moment my fingers brushed it, a sharp sting ran up my arm, like ice biting through my veins. The card was warm. I dropped it instantly, but when it hit the snow, it didn't fall. It just vanished, sinking into the white as though the ground had swallowed it whole. I backed away, muttering a curse I hadn't used since boyhood. My voice sounded strange in the emptiness, too loud, like it didn't belong to me. I could have sworn I heard laughter, then soft, distant, feminine, but coming from everywhere at once. It wasn't cruel, exactly, just knowing. Like she'd been waiting. I hurried on, boots crunching faster now, heart slamming against my ribs. The road curved, and through the snow blur I saw the outline of the old church-black steeple against a bruised sky. Folks said the miners buried their dead out back when the graveyard filled. I never believed much in curses, but that night the air itself seemed to hum with one. When I reached the church gate, I paused. The wind had died again, and the moon burned low, pale as bone. The iron latch was rimed with frost. I leaned against it, breathing hard, listening, and that's when I heard the whisper again. Closer this time. Silas. I froze. The sound came from nowhere and everywhere, from inside my skull and the edge of the trees all at once. "Who's there?" My voice cracked. "Show yourself." Nothing. Just the snow. And then, from the edge of the forest, something gleamed, a flicker of light, gold and flickering, like a candle trapped in glass. I took a step toward it before I knew why. Each step sank deeper into the drifts, but the light didn't move. When I got close enough to see, I realized it wasn't a candle at all. It was a lantern, old, rusted, swinging from a low branch. Beneath it hung a small sign, carved into the bark. "The debt is never settled." The flame sputtered and died. I turned and ran. The trees blurred together, the world spinning in shades of gray and silver. When I finally stumbled back onto the road, the sky had shifted, the moon hidden now behind clouds thick as stone. And in that dark silence, I heard something following me. Not footsteps, not breathing, just a low rustle, like silk dragging across the snow. I didn't dare look back. By the time I reached the edge of town, my lungs were burning. I caught sight of the old saloon sign swinging in the wind and felt a rush of relief so fierce it almost hurt. I swore to myself I'd never gamble again, never tempt chance, never walk that cursed road after dark. But even as I said it, I could feel the coin still burning in my pocket, heavy, hot, whispering against my thigh like a second heartbeat. And somewhere behind me, far off in the trees, I thought I heard that sound again. Cards being shuffled, one after another, patient and steady, as if the game wasn't over. Not yet. The morning after the encounter, I woke in my cabin to the pale light of dawn spilling through the frosted windows. My hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from the memory of what I'd seen. The Queen of Spades still sat on my nightstand where I'd left it, its corner stiff with dried blood. I hadn't dreamed it. I'd carried it home without realizing. The fire in the hearth had died sometime in the night, leaving only a curl of smoke and the smell of half-burnt pine. I poured myself a slug of whiskey from the bottle by the bed, though the liquor felt thin, tasteless. I remember staring at the card for a long while, waiting for it to make sense. It didn't. By midday, I was back at the saloon, not because I wanted to play, but because that's where men like me go when the quiet gets too loud. The 7 hands looked worse in daylight, every bottle sticky, every chair scarred. A single stove smoked in the corner, struggling to keep the frost off the mirrors. Lucky Jones, barked a voice from the bar. Thought you'd gone north for good. It was John Mallory, the old undertaker. He'd been around longer than the town itself, and his hands always smelled faintly of pine tar and formaldehyde. Still breathing, John, I said, sliding onto the stool beside him. Barely. He nodded toward the cards tucked into my coat pocket. Then quit tempting fate. I didn't answer. Instead, I told him what I'd seen the woman in white, the way the snow hadn't shifted under her feet, the playing card, the voice whispering my name. His eyes didn't widen, didn't blink. He just listened. When I finished, he said quietly, "You saw Sarah Wickham." The name came out like smoke from a cold chimney. I felt the hairs on my arms rise. "She was married to a gambler," he went on, voice like gravel. "Guy by the name of Caleb Wickham. Won himself into debt, deeper than most men dig. When the cards turned on him, he did the coward's thing, put a bullet in his head. Sarah found him, and when she saw the note he'd left behind, the one that said her dowry had paid his final wager, she followed him, rope round her neck before dawn. Since then, they say she walks every road where the gamblers tread, and when she appears, she takes something." I finished for him. He nodded once. "A debt must be collected. Always." For a while, neither of us spoke. Outside, snow was falling again, thicker now, muffling the world in white. The sound of the wind through the rafters made a low moan. I left the saloon before dark. Couldn't stand the heat of the stove or the smell of fear on my own coat. The road home wound past the churchyard, and I thought maybe if I looked upon the place where she died, I could understand. I don't know what I expected to find. The cemetery was little more than a fenced patch of frozen dirt, half buried in snow. The gravestones leaned like old men's backs. My breath came out in sharp plumes, each one breaking the silence like a prayer. That's when I saw the footprints. They didn't belong to me, too small, too light, and yet they pressed deep into the snow, as though something heavier than bone had walked there. They led past the graves, toward the tree line, and though every part of me screamed to turn back, I followed. The woods were quiet, except for the sound of something soft dragging in the distance. I thought it was an animal at first, a wounded deer maybe, but then I heard it, a voice, thin and reedy, humming a tune I recognized. It was the lullaby I'd whistled the night before. My throat went dry. "Who's there?" I called out, the words trembling into the frost. The trees didn't answer, but the humming stopped. And then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling behind me. When I turned, I saw him. Not her. Him. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, coat torn, hat low over his eyes. His face was gray, the skin puckered like wax, left too close to the flame. His mouth hung open as though speech was a memory that no longer fit his tongue. He took one step forward, then another, and as he came into the moonlight, I saw the hole right in the middle of his forehead. Caleb Wickham. The air went still, heavy with the scent of gunpowder and dirt. I tried to move, to run, but my legs felt bolted to the ground. He raised his hand, or what was left of it. Between the blackened fingers, something glinted. A coin. Silver. Like mine. He spoke at last, voice hollow, rattling through the cold. "Your turn, Lucky." He flicked the coin toward me. It landed in the snow at my feet, spinning slow, ringing faintly like a church bell in the dark. When it stopped, I saw what was carved on it. A single spade, worn but deep. My coin. The one I'd used to win his last hand. By the time I looked up, he was gone. The footprints had vanished, swallowed by the storm that had begun to fall. I stood there a long time, holding that cursed silver, the cold biting through my gloves, and I knew whatever debt he'd carried, it wasn't settled. It had just been passed on. When I turned for home, the wind was howling again, and somewhere behind me, faint as the shuffle of cards on a wooden table, a woman's laugh floated through the snow. The wind didn't stop for 3 days. It screamed across the valley like a thing with lungs and teeth, flaying the walls of my cabin with ice. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that coin spinning in the snow, Saw Caleb Wickham's dead grin flickering behind my lids like a photograph left too long in the fire. On the fourth morning, the storm broke. The air was still too still, and the light had that strange pewter hue that makes the world feel hollow. I packed what was left of my whiskey, pulled on my coat, and stepped outside. The snow came up to my knees, blue and glittering in the Sunday. That was when I noticed it. A trail of cards, half buried, leading down toward the river. They were scattered like breadcrumbs, their faces turned upward. A 5 of clubs, a 10 of hearts, a jack of spades. The trail ended where the river froze into a glassy, pale mirror, and, sitting at the center of that ice, I swear to God, was a poker table. Not a dream, not a trick of light. A real table, dark wood, 4 chairs, and a deck of cards already cut and waiting. Someone, something, wanted me to play. I should have turned back. Should have burned that damned coin, walked to the next town, confessed everything to a priest. But gamblers like me don't run. We double down. I stepped out onto the ice. Each footfall echoed beneath me like the slow creak of a coffin lid. When I reached the table, I saw them waiting. 3 players. The first was Caleb Wickham, face gray, eyes clouded, lips trembling as though whispering prayers to no one. The second was a man I'd once played against in Butte Chester Doyle. They'd called him the Ace. He died in a hotel fire, years ago. His skin looked melted, the flesh clinging to bone like candle wax. And the third was her, Sarah. The woman in white. She sat perfectly still, hands folded before her, eyes black as the riverbed below. When she smiled, the air turned cold enough to bite my teeth. "Sit, Silas," she said. Her voice was soft like silk drawn over glass. "The table's waiting." I didn't move. "You're not real." Her smile didn't falter. Neither is luck. Something about the way she said it pulled me down. Before I knew it, I was seated, my hands resting on the felt. The cards dealt themselves slow, deliberate, like the invisible hands of the dead had taken it upon themselves to see the game played proper. Each round, the stakes rose. First, the sound of wind grew fainter. Then, my breath began to frost heavier on the air. Then, the faces of my opponents blurred until they looked more shadow than man. I kept playing, because that's what gamblers do. After the 4th hand, Sarah leaned forward, her eyes glimmering like the underside of a blade. "Do you know why they call it the Queen of Spades, Silas?" I swallowed hard. "Because it's bad luck." She tilted her head. "No, because she buries kings." Her hand turned, and there it was again, the Queen of Spades, its edges slick with something dark. Blood or ink, I couldn't tell. She placed it in front of me, face up. "Your wager," she said. I didn't speak. Couldn't. Then the coin in my pocket began to burn so hot I thought it might melt through my coat. I pulled it out, stared at it, silver gleaming like the moon's eye. My fingers acted before my mind could stop them. I placed it on the card. The table hummed. The ice beneath us groaned. Sarah smiled, and her teeth were far too sharp. Dead accepted. Then everything happened at once. The river cracked beneath us, a deafening sound like the earth itself breaking its back. The chairs toppled, the cards flew, the dead men screamed. I fell, tumbling through shards of black water, the cold slicing into me like knives. Under the surface, I saw her hair floating like seaweed, eyes wide and bright. Her arms reached for me, wrapping around my chest. She whispered into my ear, though the water muted all else. "Lucky Jones, your name was written long ago." The ice sealed shut above me. I should have drowned. I wanted to drown. But something dragged me up again, not out of mercy, but to keep me alive long enough to understand the weight of what I'd done. When I came to, I was back on the riverbank, my clothes frozen stiff. The table was gone, the cards gone. Only the coin remained pressed into my palm so deep it left an imprint. The words were carved into it now. Where the spade had been, in debt you remain. And faintly, beneath the wind, I heard that same whispering chorus, 1,000 voices murmuring my name, over and over, like they were counting down a debt yet unpaid. That night I couldn't bring myself to light a fire. The warmth felt undeserved. And outside my window, through the frost, I thought I saw her again, the woman in white standing at the tree line, watching, waiting. The game wasn't over. Not yet. By the time February clawed its way into the valley, the world had turned to ice. The pines were brittle silhouettes, the sky a dull bruise. The river, the one that had swallowed my sanity, whole no longer sang. It watched. I could feel it under the crusted snow, waiting for something to break. I tried to live, as if nothing had happened. Tried to chop wood, mend traps, patch leaks, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My reflection in the cabin window looked paler every day, not from the cold, but from something leaching out of me, piece by piece. The nights were the worst. That whispering, low and constant, bleeding from the corners of the room. Sometimes it came from inside the stove, sometimes from beneath the floorboards. It was like the river had found its way into the timber, like it wanted to remind me what I owed. The coin never left my hand anymore. I couldn't. When I tried to throw it away, it burned my palm, just a dull, steady pain, like it was searing itself into my blood. And sometimes, when the light hit it just right, I swore I could see movement inside the metal, the faint shimmer of cards shuffling in the dark. On the 13th night, the storm came. No warning, just a slam of wind so strong it bent the door inward and killed the lantern. The cabin shuddered like something breathing beneath it. I fumbled for my matches and froze. Because there was a voice, right behind me. Lucky Jones, it said, you didn't pay your ante. The voice was smooth male, but too clean, too precise, as if every word had been measured with a blade. I turned slowly. A man stood there, tall, his coat black as burned leather. His hat shadowed most of his face, but what I could see wasn't right. The skin looked polished, reflective, like silver. His eyes gleamed like coins. I don't owe you, I rasped. He smiled. The sound that followed wasn't laughter. It was metal striking metal, clink, clink, clink. You played the table, Silas. You wagered your coin. You signed the contract when you let it bleed. I backed toward the stove. My legs hit the chair. My balance almost gave. Who sent you? She did. The man tilted his head. The one in white. The widow of chance. The dealer of lost men. Then he stepped closer, and I saw the frost trailing behind his boots. Every step he took, the floorboards blackened, then cracked. Debt, he whispered, is not measured in money. It's measured in memory. He extended a gloved hand. And I've come to collect. Something inside me broke. I grabbed the iron poker from beside the stove and swung hard. It hit his arm with a sound like striking a bell. The reverberation nearly shattered my teeth. He didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward, close enough that I could smell the cold, that hollow, metallic stench that lives in graves. Every life you took, he murmured. Every hand you broke, every man you cheated, they've gathered, and they've chosen me to speak. He lifted his other hand, and from beneath his sleeve spilled a deck of cards, not paper now, but bone, pale, fragile, clicking softly as they fell across the floor. The Queen of Spades landed face up. She's merciful, Silas, he said. She only takes what was stolen. Then, the cabin windows shattered inward. The storm roared through, a tidal wave of white and sound. The candle went out, and for a moment I thought the world itself had been erased. When I woke, I was lying outside in the snow, half buried, half frozen. The cabin behind me was gone, burned to a black skeleton. No smoke, no flame. Just the outline of what had once been a life. In my hand, I still held the coin, but it wasn't silver anymore. It was black slick, heavy, carved with new words. Balance due. I stumbled to my feet, teeth chattering, eyes streaming from the cold. The forest was silent again. The kind of silence that comes after the screaming stops. Down the hill, in the clearing, I saw movement. A woman's silhouette, long hair, white dress. Her face turned toward me. "Sarah," I shouted, my voice cracking like the ice. "What do you want?" For a heartbeat, she stood still. Then she raised her hand and pointed to the ground beneath me. The snow shifted, and beneath it, half buried, were cards, hundreds of them. Thousands. Each bore my name. Each marked with the same symbol, the Queen of Spades. I dropped to my knees, the coin burning through my glove, through my skin. I could feel it fusing to my palm. The pain wasn't fire anymore. It was cold, the kind that eats the nerves first, then the soul. Somewhere, beyond the trees, a slow shuffle began a rhythm, steady and patient, like the sound of a dealer cutting the deck before the final hand. I knew then what was coming. The collector wasn't done, and the next game would not be played with cards. It would be played with lives. Outside, the wind whispered again, that same cursed phrase that followed me through every dream since that night. In debt, you remain. And I realized something that froze me to the marrow. It wasn't just my debt anymore. It was spreading through every man I'd touched, every deal I'd made, every coin I'd passed. The collector wasn't just here for me. He was building his table again. And I, fool that I was, had helped him set it. Snow was falling again. Not the light, delicate kind that children chase with open palms, but the heavy, wet kind that buries everything, roads, fences, memories. The storm had returned, just as Jonas predicted. But this time, it wasn't just the mountain breathing. It was him. Elias trudged up the slope, the lantern swinging weakly in his hand. His coat was torn. His breath came out in clouds that barely lifted before freezing in the air. Behind him, the old lodge was silent, a dark tooth in the whiteness. Inside, the others were gone, all except him. He stopped near the ridge where they had buried the ledger, the cursed book that held their names, and the weight of every foolish promise they'd made to the man who called himself Jonas Whitlock, the same man who had not aged a day in 50 years. Elias scraped away the snow with trembling hands until his nails hit the wooden lid. He wrenched it open. The black ledger sat inside, perfectly dry, as if the storm had respected it. He hesitated only a moment before tearing it open. Names. Dozens of them. All crossed out but one, Elias North. The ink under his name was still wet. A voice drifted from behind him, low and even, carried on the wind. "Looking for a way out, Mr. North?" Elias turned. Jonas was there, standing just beyond the lamplight, untouched by the snow. His clothes were the same as the night they'd met, black wool coat, silver scarf, gloves, spotless. But his eyes, they were the pale gray of the storm itself. Elias swallowed hard. "You lied to us. All of us. That wasn't a wager. It was a damn pact." Jonas smiled faintly. "And yet you signed it. A wager, a pact, a debt. Call it what you will. Men gamble their souls in smaller games every day." Elias raised the ledger. "Then take it. Take it, and leave me." Jonas tilted his head, the way a wolf might consider a wounded deer. "It doesn't work that way. The ledger doesn't belong to me. It belongs to whoever owes the most." Elias looked down. His name glowed faintly now, as though burning from within the paper. He realized, with a coldness deeper than the snow, that the book had already chosen. He had outlasted the others, which meant the debt had nowhere else to go. "I didn't ask for this," he shouted into the storm. Jonas stepped closer, the snow hissing under his boots. "No one ever does. But you kept your promise, didn't you? You stayed. You played the game longer than any of them. And the house," he tapped the ledger, "always wins." The wind howled then, a chorus of voices rising from the mountain. Elias felt something pull at him, threads of heat and memory being unwound from his chest. The storm around them grew brighter, almost alive. He stumbled backward. "What are you doing to me?" Jonas's smile widened. "Settling accounts." The snow rose like a tide. It swallowed the light, the ground, the world. Elias screamed, but the sound was ripped from his throat before it reached his ears. He felt the cold cut deeper, not into his skin, but into his name. Then, silence. When the storm cleared hours later, the ridge was smooth again. Only the edge of the ledger peeked from beneath a perfect layer of frost. Jonas stood alone, brushing the snow from his coat. He opened the book once more. The last name had vanished. The page was blank, save for a faint outline as though his signature had burned itself into the parchment and faded away. He sighed, closed the ledger, and tucked it beneath his arm. As he walked down toward the valley, a new storm gathered at his back. The wind whispered something faint, almost like laughter. By morning, the town below would speak of strange lights in the mountains, of a man in a black coat walking through the snow without leaving footprints. They would not speak of the wager. They never did. The earth maw. The desert never sleeps, it just holds its breath. That's what my father used to say, back when we still lived near the red hills of San Uvaldo, New Mexico. I remember those days like an old photograph, the kind where the colors have faded to rust and sand. The wind always smelled of dust and old bones, and when the sun went down, the earth glowed like it was breathing heat from something trapped deep inside. In that dry, endless place, there was a hill the locals called La Boca de Tierra, the mouth of the earth, a hollow mound of sandstone and clay carved through centuries of wind. From a distance, it looked like a sleeping animal, jaw half open. Up close, you could hear things. Whispers, they said. The kind that made your skin crawl without knowing why. The elders warned us not to go near it. Said it was a place of old hunger. Said the ground there had memory, and it still remembered the taste of children. I was 8 that summer. Tommy was 5, my cousin, the smallest of us, always trying to prove he wasn't afraid. He had a smile that never seemed to sit still, like it was always running ahead of him. That morning, he showed up at my door with a jar full of beetles and said, "Let's go find the earth's mouth, Eli. I want to hear it talk." I told him he was stupid. He grinned like that was permission. We walked out past the dry riverbed, through the mesquite brush and the cracked stones. The sun was already burning the sky white. The desert stretched forever, a mirage that kept promising water, but only gave you more dust. When we reached the ridge, we saw it. The sinkhole was smaller than I remembered, or maybe the desert had grown. It was a perfect circle, maybe 10 feet wide, dark as pitch. The air around it was cool, too cool for noon. No birds, no insects, just the wind humming through it, low and slow, like something breathing below. Tommy dropped a rock into it. We waited. No sound came back. He laughed. "Maybe it's hungry," he said, leaning closer. The wind seemed to shift when he did. I remember how the sand shivered, how the hairs on my neck rose like static. "Tommy, stop," Dud said. But before I could finish, the ground near the rim cracked with a dry snap, and Tommy was gone. No scream, no sound, just gone. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. Then, I saw the small handprint left on the red dust, and the edge of the earth still crumbling, like something had swallowed him whole. I ran, the kind of running that tears your lungs apart, all the way back to the village, screaming his name, screaming for help. By the time I got there, my mother was already outside, face pale as bone. The sheriff came, then the volunteer firemen, and finally the old men with their ropes and flashlights. They followed me back up the ridge. The desert looked different now, meaner, older. The light was fading, turning the sand the color of blood. One of the elders, Mateo Cruz, stood at the edge of the hole. He was Navajo, and the others said he knew the old words, the ones meant to keep the dark from listening. He murmured something under his breath, then dropped a stone tied to a rope into the pit. They waited for it to hit bottom. It never did. When they finally lowered a man down, Sheriff Harlan himself, the rope pulled tight after only a few feet. "Something's down here," he called up. "Feels like a tunnel heading north." The others tied lanterns, ropes, axes, and one by one they disappeared into the throat of the earth. Uros passed. The wind howled across the mesa, and the sand began to move again, crawling over their tracks like fingers trying to erase them. I sat beside my mother, Her rosary beads clutched so hard, her knuckles bled. Every now and then we heard echoes, voices bouncing up through the sinkhole. They sounded warped, stretched, like the desert was chewing on them before spitting them back. Then, silence. For a long time, nothing. Until, just before dawn, a single voice came crawling up from the pit. It wasn't the sheriff. It wasn't anyone we knew. It was Tommy. He was singing. A soft little hum. The same tune he used to whistle when we walked home from church. But it was wrong somehow. Too slow. Too low. Like something else was humming through him. Mateo Cruz went to the edge and called out his name. No answer. Then the singing stopped. When the sheriff finally climbed back up, his face was gray, his eyes wide and hollow. He didn't say a word, just fell to his knees and vomited in the sand. The rope came up after him, frayed, wet and dark. At the end of it, clinging to the fibers, was something small, a child's shoe, and inside it half a foot, torn clean. My mother fainted. The men crossed themselves. Mateo whispered a single word, Kiva. That night, the village locked their doors. No one spoke of what had happened. No one went near the ridge. But I couldn't sleep, because through the wind, I kept hearing that humming again, low, soft, like a voice calling my name from under the earth. And the strangest thing, the next morning, when I went to my window, I saw something in the dirt outside, tiny footprints, bare, red, and leading toward the hill. I didn't tell anyone about the footprints. How could I? The grown-ups already said the desert had swallowed Tommy whole. The sheriff wrote it up as a sinkhole collapse, said there'd been no way to recover the body. They sealed the place off with boards and warning signs that the wind tore down the next day. And by the following week, the town went quiet again like it always did after something bad happened. But I couldn't stop thinking about the way those footprints looked small, bare, pressed deep like someone walking out of the sand barefoot, dragging their toes as if the ground itself didn't want to let go. I followed them as far as the old arroyo, where they just stopped. The earth there looked turned up, soft in places, almost breathing. At night, I started hearing sounds under the floor. Soft tapping at first, like rain. But there hadn't been rain in months. Then came the humming, the same broken tune Tommy used to whistle when he got nervous. I pressed my ear against the floorboards and swore I could hear voices behind it, whispering low, like a choir trapped underground. When I told my mother, she slapped me. Hard. She said to never speak that name again. But her hands were shaking, and when she tucked me into bed that night, she left the lamp burning till morning. The next few days, people in town started acting strange. Livestock went missing. A sinkhole opened near the schoolyard and swallowed half the fence. The preacher's wife claimed she heard singing coming from the cemetery, not hymns, but something older, slower. And one night, a man named Burke, one of the firemen who'd gone down after Tommy showed up at the saloon with his eyes bloodshot and his clothes caked with red clay. He said he could still hear the boy's voice, calling from inside the hill. Said he saw faces in the dirt trying to crawl up to the surface. Nobody believed him, of course. They laughed it off, poured him another drink, said he'd been working too hard. But I saw him the next morning sitting in his truck with a gun in his lap. The inside of the windshield was splattered dark. The bullet hole was clean. He'd written 3 words on a scrap of newspaper, taped to the dash. They're still singing. A week later, Mateo Cruz came to see my mother. He brought sage and tobacco, and that same haunted look he wore the night Tommy disappeared. I listened from the hallway while he spoke, in low tones. He said there was a place beneath the Red Hills older than the mines, older than the pueblos where the ground had opened once before. The ancestors had sealed it with fire and song, using the bodies of their own dead to quiet the hunger below, but the wind and the rain had worn that seal away. The mouth is waking, he said. The voices want to be remembered. My mother told him to leave, but I could tell she believed every word. That night I couldn't sleep again. The floor was trembling faintly, like someone walking far below. I lit a candle and crept to the back door. The wind was blowing from the ridge, carrying that same smell of dust and decay. I followed it, the candle flickering weakly against the dark. When I reached the arroyo, the sand was cold under my feet. The moon was full, too full, lighting the world in silver. And then I heard it again. That hum. Dozens of voices this time, layered and deep, rising from the earth like a hymn sung backward. I dropped the candle. The light flared once, then went out. But my eyes had already adjusted. The ground was shifting ahead of me, the sand pulsing in slow, steady breaths. Then, one by one, I saw hands pushing through it. Small hands, gray and dry, like the earth had carved them out of itself. They moved together, rhythmic, swaying, like a choir conducting some buried ritual. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. All I could do was stare as the dirt around them began to crack, revealing faces beneath the shapes of children, their mouths open but filled with soil. And from those mouths, the humming grew louder. I heard my name, and then another sound, deeper the groan of something vast and hollow turning in its sleep. The ground beneath me gave a violent shudder. I fell, catching myself on the rocks, just as a sinkhole opened a few feet ahead, a wide black circle swallowing the air. I crawled backward, breath sharp and fast, until I felt someone's hand grab my shoulder. It was Mateo. His face was pale with moonlight, eyes wide with something like recognition or dread. "You shouldn't have come here, boy," he said. "They remember your blood." He pulled me back from the rim, chanting in a language I didn't know. The ground settled. The hands sank slowly beneath the surface again, leaving only the faint outline of where they'd been. We walked home in silence. At the door, he told my mother the thing below wasn't just hungry, it was lonely. It wanted company, wanted to be worshipped again. The children were only the beginning. "It sings," he said, "so we will answer." The next morning, the town woke to find another sinkhole. This one swallowed half the churchyard. Graves torn open, caskets hanging like broken teeth. Inside one of them, they found something that didn't belong, a small clay mask, shaped like a screaming face, smeared with blood. The sheriff ordered everyone to stay home, said it was just a geological thing, nothing to worry about. But by sunset, the wind carried that sound again low, harmonic, spreading across the valley like fog. People started gathering at their windows, listening. Some cried. Some hummed along without realizing they were doing it. My mother locked the doors and covered her ears, but I could see her lips moving too, whispering the tune she swore she didn't know. That night, Mateo returned with a bundle of candles and salt. He drew a circle on the floor, told us to stay inside it. "The choir is calling for its missing voice," he said. "It won't stop until the song is complete." I asked him what that meant. He looked at me for a long time, then said, "It wants the one who heard it first." The meaning hit me too slow. By the time I realized what he meant, the floorboards were already groaning beneath us. Something moved under the house, heavy, slow, dragging against the beams. My mother clutched me close. Mateo started chanting louder, sprinkling salt in the cracks. The walls rattled. The lamps flickered out. Then came that humming again, not from the distance this time, but from right beneath our feet. I could feel it vibrating in my ribs. The sound of 100 small voices rising, building into something almost beautiful. The floor split open, dust flying, and from the gap between the boards, a pale hand reached up small, trembling, the nails caked in clay. It was Tommy's. He didn't pull himself through. He just held his palm out, open. On it lay a small, round stone, the same kind the sheriff had tied to a rope weeks ago. The same kind that had never come back. Only now, it was carved with a symbol, a spiral with a dot in the center, like an eye looking straight through me. Then the hand withdrew, melting into the dark. The humming stopped. Mateo fell to his knees, muttering prayers. My mother sobbed quietly beside him, and me. I just stared at that spiral in the dirt, glowing faintly in the lamplight. It pulsed once, like a heartbeat, then faded. After that night, Mateo disappeared. No one saw him again. They said he'd gone back to the reservation, but I knew better, because 2 nights later, I heard the choir again, louder this time, closer. And in the middle of that unholy harmony, I could hear a new voice joining in. It was deeper, older, and it was singing Mateo's name. The desert changed after that night. Or maybe it was me who changed my eyes, seeing what had always been there. The earth itself seemed restless. The wind carried a deeper tone, like something breathing through the bones of the land. Even the light felt wrong. The red cliffs didn't just glow at dusk anymore. They seemed to pulse slow, rhythmic, as though they were filled with blood. And the people, they started leaving, one by one. By the end of that summer, half the town had packed up. The preacher said the Lord was testing us. The sheriff said it was sinkholes. But those who stayed, those who still heard the humming, they didn't talk much anymore. Just watched the horizon, where the hills met the sky, waiting for the next voice to rise from the ground. My mother tried to pretend it was all over. She planted flowers where the floorboards had cracked and prayed before bed without looking me in the eye. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd hear her humming under her breath. That same melody, slow and wrong. She didn't even notice she was doing it. Then came the letter. It was left at our door, wrapped in brown paper and twine. No stamp, no name. Inside was a torn scrap of notebook paper, smeared with what looked like red clay. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. I found the hollow. Don't follow. The voices lie. It was signed, Mateo. But there was something else inside, a dried sprig of sage and a piece of fabric, frayed at the edge, stained dark in the middle. It looked burned. I don't know why, but I couldn't stop staring at that mark. It wasn't soot. It was blood old, dry, baked into the weave like the desert had claimed it. That night, I dreamed of a tunnel beneath the hills. The walls were alive, pulsing like veins. Faces moved beneath the surface of the clay, whispering in voices I almost recognized. Some of them called my name. Some of them sang. And in the center of it all was a great hollow chamber, vast, circular, lit by a red light that came from nowhere. When I woke, my window was open, and the smell of sage was in the air. I left before dawn. My mother was still asleep, or pretending to be. I took the flashlight and a rope from the shed and headed out toward the hills. The sand was cool under my boots. Every few yards, I saw more cracks in the earth, narrow fissures like the ground was splitting apart, trying to speak. I found the first marker at sunrise, a circle of stones arranged carefully. In the center, a spiral carved into the dirt, just like the one that had glowed under our house. And beside it, a footprint too large for a man, too long, as if the heel had never touched the ground. I followed the tracks. They led toward the largest sinkhole near the old mining shaft, the one the sheriff had fenced off years ago. The fence was gone now, half buried in sand. The hole was wider than I remembered, maybe 15 feet across, its rim crumbling into darkness. The air that rose from it was warm, and it smelled, not rotten, not sulfuric, but earthy, like wet clay after a storm, like something newly made. I tied the rope around a boulder and lowered myself in. The beam of my flashlight cut through the dark, landing on walls streaked with deep red. The rock wasn't smooth. It looked carved, shaped like someone had once built tunnels here, then left them to be reclaimed by the earth. The deeper I went, the more the walls changed. The color darkened from rust to crimson. The air thickened. And somewhere below, faint but distinct, I began to hear it again, the low hum of the buried choir. At first, it was distant, just a vibration in my chest. But as I descended, it became clearer. Voices, layered upon voices, weaving in strange intervals, not quite harmony, not quite discord. I could almost make out words, but they slipped through my mind like smoke. I reached the bottom. The tunnel opened into a wide chamber, circular, ribbed with roots that hung like tendons. The walls glowed faintly red, as if light were seeping through from behind the stone. And there, in the middle, was Mateo. He was kneeling before the far wall, his back to me, his clothes torn and caked with clay. I called his name, but he didn't move. When I came closer, I saw his hands were pressed against the wall, fingers spread wide, trembling. His lips were moving. He was singing softly, hoarsely, the same melody I'd heard in my dreams. I reached for his shoulder. His skin was cold, dry as dust. He turned his head slowly. His eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them. Just emptiness. And then I realized the sound wasn't coming from his mouth anymore. It was coming from inside the wall. I stepped back. The stone rippled under his palms, like something breathing beneath it. A hand pushed through from the other side, small, childlike, followed by another and another. Dozens of them. The wall began to bulge outward, faces pressing against it from within. I ran. The tunnel shifted around me, groaning. The ground was slick with red mud. My flashlight flickered, throwing shadows that moved on their own. I could still hear the voices louder now, rising into a feverish chant. And beneath them, a new sound emerged deep, guttural, like the rumble of a mountain's stomach. The floor buckled. I fell hard, my flashlight skidding away. Its beam landed on something pale ahead, a skeleton half buried in the wall, jaw open in a silent scream. Around its neck hung a string of beads, still glowing faintly red. I crawled forward and saw carvings etched into the stone beside it. Spirals, circles, symbols that seemed to move when I looked at them too long, and between them a single line of words carved in English, jagged and desperate. We sealed it with song. The chamber behind me erupted in sound. The air vibrated like a struck bell. I turned and saw the wall where Mateo had knelt. It was gone. In its place yawned a great hollow mouth of red clay, lined with what looked like stone teeth. The choir was inside it now. Hundreds of voices calling out, not in pain but in welcome. I ran toward the shaft, lungs burning, the sound chasing me like wind through a canyon. The rope was still there, swinging slightly, as if something had just climbed up it. Something large. I didn't look back. I scrambled up, hands bleeding, heart hammering so loud I could barely hear the chanting anymore. When I reached the top, the sky was already turning gray. The wind howled over the ridge, carrying that same low hum. The earth was moving. Slowly, the rim of the sinkhole was collapsing inward, like the ground was taking a breath. Then, with a roar that shook the cliffs, it sealed itself shut. Silence. I lay there in the sand, staring up at the morning light. The red glow beneath the surface faded, replaced by the dull color of desert clay. The hum was gone, but in its place came something else, faint, distant. The sound of a single child humming just under the surface, keeping the rhythm for a song that would never end. I went back to town that afternoon, covered in dust. No one asked where I'd been. The sheriff's office was empty, doors open, chairs knocked over. The church bell was still ringing slow, automatic, like it didn't know the congregation was gone. And when I reached home, the door was ajar. The flowers on the table had wilted. My mother's Bible lay open, pages curled from heat. The word Genesis was burned into the paper, not written, but branded. Outside, a wind rose dry, whispering, almost human. And somewhere in that sound, faint but certain, I heard the buried choir again. Only now, they were singing a new name. Mine. The storm had been circling for hours, yet no rain came, only the trembling hum that rolled across the mesa, low and patient, like something breathing under the earth. Sheriff Dale stood at the edge of the red hollow with a lantern in hand, its flame a pale coin against the night. His boot sank into the soft grit that seemed to pulse faintly, as if the ground itself were remembering. The rescue team had gone quiet hours ago. Only the sheriff remained. They said the sound came from below, the same sound the old people used to warn about. The maw was waking. The earth was hungry again. He kneeled and pressed his ear to the ground. There it was, a rhythm, not the beating of a heart, but the shuffling of something vast, something with lungs of dust. His breath stuttered. In the lantern light, the soil was trembling, not from wind, not from any quake, but like an animal twitching in sleep. He whispered the names of the missing. Tommy first, then the two men who went down after him, then the miners from decades before. Each name sank softly into the dirt, and each was answered by a faint sigh from below. A memory flickered through Dale's mind, his grandmother's voice a whisper by firelight. The Kiva beast does not hunt. It waits. It listens. for the sound of sorrow. That's what it feeds on. The sheriff rose and walked toward the central pit, the largest one 30 feet across, ringed with stones blackened from old burns. He knew he shouldn't, but something in the air pulled him forward, a kind of gravity that wasn't of the world. His lantern flickered as he leaned over the edge. The hole was no longer a hole. It pulsed open and shut like a throat, its walls slick with mud the color of rust. The smell, wet iron, rot, and old smoke rose up to meet him. And then it spoke, not in words, not in any human voice, but through vibration, through feeling. He understood without translation. The thing below remembered every soul it had taken. It knew their shapes, their thoughts, their unfinished prayers. It wanted him to join the choir beneath. Dale stepped back, shaking his head, whispering a desperate no. The ground responded, with a sound like a sigh, and then a crack. The lantern fell from his hand, disappearing into the pit. It didn't hit bottom. Instead, the flames spread outward, illuminating something vast, ribs made of stone, veins of blackened silver, a cavern shaped like a sleeping god's chest. He saw movement there, shadows swimming under the surface. Dozens, no, hundreds of forms shifting, merging, separating again. Their faces flickered in the glow. Some he recognized. The lost men, the boy, and others too ancient to name. The earth remembers, he murmured, and then the song began. Soft at first, a low moan that rose from beneath his feet. It was not beautiful, not ugly either, just inevitable. It was the sound of time decaying. It was hunger set to melody. The soil began to move, threads of dust twining upward like fingers reaching for him. He turned to run, but the ground gave way. The red dirt split open, swallowing his leg, then his waist. He felt it, not the pain of falling, but the warm, suffocating embrace of something alive. The song grew louder, surrounding him from every direction. He tried to scream, but the sound that came out was not his own. It was a harmony of countless others, layered and eternal. As he sank, he saw the horizon bend, as if the desert itself was folding inward. The stars above blurred into streaks of white. The last thing he felt was the pulse of the earth sinking with his heartbeat, until they became one. Then silence. By dawn, the hollow had sealed itself shut again. Only a faint circular mark remained, like a scar. The wind brushed across it, carrying with it a whisper that no one could translate. But those who listened long enough said they could almost hear words in the rhythm of the sand. The earth was hungry, and now it rests. Morning in the desert is never silent. The wind hums against the stones, the sun rises without sound, and somewhere beneath it all, the earth murmurs like a sleeping animal. But this morning felt different, hollow, too still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The red hollow where Sheriff Dale vanished had been smoothed over by the night's wind. The locals said it was a blessing, that the land had finally closed its mouth, but no one stepped near. They left offerings instead, a circle of cornmeal, a silver cross, an old feathered charm bleached by Sunday, and then they left, quietly, without looking back. Only one person stayed. Martha Dale sat on the hood of her husband's rusted truck, hands folded tight in her lap. She hadn't cried. Not when the rescue crews gave up. Not when the preacher said it was God's will. She simply waited. She could still feel him out there, not gone, not dead, but under. When the wind shifted, she heard it again. That faint hum rising from the earth. That pulse like the beating of a heart deep below her. It wasn't threatening this time. It was soft, almost melodic, a lullaby without words. She slid off the truck, her boots sinking slightly into the red sand. Every step felt guided, as if the ground wanted her to follow. The heat shimmered in front of her, blurring the air into waves, and at the center of it, she saw the faint outline of something breathing the earth, rising and falling, slow and steady. When she reached the hollow, she knelt. The sand was warm to the touch, alive in a way she couldn't explain. It thrummed under her palm, matching the rhythm of her own heartbeat. "Dale?" she whispered. For a long moment there was nothing. Only the sound of her own breath and the soft whistle of wind through the brush. Then the earth answered not with a voice, but a vibration. Gentle, familiar. She closed her eyes. The world around her shifted, not in sight but in feeling. She was no longer kneeling above ground. She was somewhere between waking and sleep, in a place made of warmth and soil and memory. The air was thick, golden, red. Shapes moved in it, slow, luminous figures drifting like dust motes. They weren't ghosts. They were echoes' lives, remembered by the land itself. Among them, she saw him, Dale, his face calm, eyes reflecting the same muted light that surrounded them. She tried to reach for him, but her hand passed through like smoke. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The earth spoke for him, its voice low and endless. We keep what is given. We sing for what is lost. The lullaby rose again, a slow, rumbling hum that seemed to come from every grain of sand. It wasn't sad. It was a song of completion, of return. Martha felt her heart beat slow, her breathing ease. The heat of the sun above her faded until she couldn't tell where her body ended and the land began. In the distance, the hollow began to move again. Not collapsing this time, but blooming, a shallow crater, opening into a perfect spiral. Its center glowing faintly. The wind carried a smell of rain that hadn't fallen in years. For the first time, the desert seemed alive in a way that was gentle. Not hungry, not vengeful, just awake. Days later, when the searchers came, they found only the truck, its door open, the seat covered in red dust. Near the center of the hollow lay a small pile of personal things, a silver ring, a sheriff's badge, and a handful of yellow desert flowers that no one remembered planting. And the earth hummed. At sunset, if one stood quietly near the red hill, the hum grew clearer. A faint, steady rhythm, layered with distant voices, not screaming, not mourning, but singing, soft and low. Some said it was the sound of wind through old sinkholes. Others swore it was the maw, singing its lullaby to those it had taken, keeping them safe, cradled in soil and shadow, far from the noise of the world above. And when night came, and the stars burned low over the horizon, the ground seemed to breathe again, slow, deep, endless, as if the desert itself were dreaming. As if, somewhere beneath it all, the law still sang. The night the woods went still. The summer I turned 9, the woods behind Grandma's house went quiet. It was July in North Carolina, thick with heat and the smell of pine sap. Crickets should have been screaming their lungs out, cicadas drilling through the air. But that night, when the moon rose full and gold behind the trees, everything just stopped. No hum, no wings, no sound at all, like the forest was holding its breath. I was sitting on the porch with Grandma, barefoot, sipping from a jar of sweet tea gone warm. She sat in her rocking chair, slow and steady, her silver hair catching the moonlight. The chair creaked with each sway, an old rhythm that had rocked generations before me to sleep. "Too still tonight," she said, squinting out toward the tree line. "When the woods go quiet, it means they're listening." "Listening to what?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were fixed on the shadowed trunks beyond the garden, where the light didn't reach. Finally, she said, "To what walks when it shouldn't?" I laughed, because I thought she was teasing the way she always did when the fireflies came out, telling me stories about ghost lights and trickster spirits that led children into the bog. But she didn't smile. "Ever hear of the skitter cat?" she asked, her voice low and even. I shook my head. "Well," she said, "you'll hear it before you see it. Sounds like claws over dry leaves, soft, too many of them. Some folks say it's just a story to keep children close to home, but others say it's real. 12 legs, 6 eyes, and a hunger for what wanders too far from the light." She leaned closer. I could smell the faint lavender in her dress, the tobacco on her breath. "When you hear the woods go still like this," she whispered, "that's when it's closest." I didn't want to believe her. But when I looked past the fence, the forest did look strange too, still too silver under the moon. The trees stood like sentinels, their bark glowing pale as bone. Every shadow looked thicker than it should have been. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of light, a long shadow stretching between two pines. But shadows don't move like that. This one rippled, low to the ground, fluid, crawling. "Grandma," I said, tugging at her sleeve. She didn't look up from her rocking. "Don't point," she murmured. "It notices when you point." I froze. "What?" The shadow crept closer. I could see where the moonlight hit it wrong, as if it wasn't one body, but many. I counted legs. 4, 6, 8, then 12. Long and thin, bending like reeds in the wind. And above them eyes. 6 of them, shining amber, catching the moon and staring straight at me. My throat locked. My breath went short. The air smelled like iron and rain. "Grandma," I hissed. It's there." But she was frowning, peering out, her eyes cloudy with age. "What's there, child?" The thing twitched, one leg sliding forward through the brush. It didn't make a sound. Not one. I grabbed her hand, cold and dry as paper. "We gotta go. Don't be foolish," she said, pulling her hand back. "Ain't nothing out there but trees and moonlight." Then snap. A single twig broke somewhere near the edge of the field. Her head turned toward the sound. Slow. I could tell she heard it too now. That sharp crack in the silence. The kind that meant something was close. Her voice softened. "Get in the house." I didn't argue. I ran bare feet, slapping against the porch steps, breath tearing out of my lungs. The screen door creaked open, slammed behind me, and I ducked under the kitchen window. Through the thin glass, I saw her still standing there on the porch, the moonlight painting her pale and still. Something moved behind her. It was taller now, stretched, crawling up the posts of the porch with impossible grace. The moonlight hit its fur, black and slick, like oil. I could see the shimmer of its 6 eyes, the gleam of wet claws, the bend of its spine like a question mark. It didn't leap. It didn't run. It flowed. Then Grandma turned. For one heartbeat, they faced each other, the old woman and the thing from the dark. Her lips moved like she was praying, but I couldn't hear the words. The next sound was a hiss, sharp, long, and almost human. The rocking chair fell over. The night swallowed the sound whole. I shut my eyes. When I opened them again, the porch was empty. The chair rocked once, twice, then stopped, and the forest started singing again. I didn't sleep that night. The house was too still, too aware, like it was listening for something just beyond its walls. Every creak of the floorboards felt deliberate. Every whisper of the wind against the shutters too slow, too careful. I sat on my bed with the blanket pulled up to my chin, staring at the window where the moonlight pooled on the floor like spilled milk. Grandma hadn't come back. Her chair was still on its side when I peeked out the window earlier, rocking once every so often in the breeze that shouldn't have been strong enough to move it. I told myself she'd gone back to the cellar, or maybe to fetch wood from the shed. But the truth was simpler, colder. The porch had swallowed her whole. I could still see her shape burned behind my eyes, standing there in the silver light. The shadow rising behind her like a second body, somewhere in the forest. Something breathed. It wasn't close, not yet, but it was there. A long inhale through a throat full of dust. It made the leaves rustle just once, then die back into silence. That's when the eyes started. At first, I thought it was just the moonlight. I blinked, and the pale dots would vanish, then come back in a different spot. But they weren't reflections. They blinked back. 6 of them. Always 6. They hovered just outside the glass, not attached to any shape I could see. But their placement was perfect. Too high, too low, too between. The pattern felt wrong in a way my mind couldn't hold. The longer I stared, the more my stomach twisted. I shut my eyes tight and whispered, "Go away." When I opened them, the window was empty again. For a while, I thought maybe it had worked. I could even hear the crickets return, faint, but real. A familiar summer sound that almost made the air breathable again. I lay down, kept my eyes closed, and tried to pretend the world outside the house was still the same. Then came the tapping. Soft, rhythmic, like claws brushing the wood. 1, 2, pause. 3, 2 more. Then nothing. It wasn't on the window. It was on the walls. I slid out of bed, the floorboards cold under my feet. The house had gone silent again, and that silence was thick enough to weigh on my chest. I tiptoed to the door, pressed my ear to it, and waited. There the sound again. This time it came from the hallway. A soft scrape, then a sigh. The old photographs on the wall rattled, just slightly, as if something big had brushed past them. My throat went dry. "Grandma?" I called. Nothing. The air smelled strange, now, like wet earth and old iron. Something shifted in the reflection of the hallway mirror. I didn't see it move directly. It was like the light bent wrong for a moment, revealing a shape the world wasn't supposed to show. A low shadow, stretched and crawling along the floorboards, with too many legs moving in sync, too smoothly. The eyes appeared next. Not in the mirror this time, in the wood itself. Tiny, glowing pinpoints peeking from the seams between boards, from the corners of the ceiling, from the gap beneath the door, all of them fixed on me. I backed away slowly. My hand brushed the old Bible on the nightstand. Grandma's Bible, the one she never let anyone touch. Its leather cover was cracked and drying, and for the first time, I understood why she'd kept it close. I clutched it tight to my chest. The whispering began. At first, it was just breath, a faint rustle like the wind through wheat. Then the words took shape. Not in English, not in any language I'd heard, but somehow I understood the meaning beneath it. It sees you. It wants you. It remembers you. The whispers crawled into my ears, soft and sticky. I pressed my palms against them and shook my head, but it only made the sound louder, closer. It was inside the walls, inside the wood, inside me, and then silence. When I looked up again, the eyes were gone. The room was empty, except for the faint pulse of the moonlight. I waited, counted the seconds, listened. Nothing. It stayed that way until dawn. Morning came gray and thin, washing the world in colorless light. I was too afraid to go outside, but hunger got the better of me. I crept into the kitchen, calling Grandma's name again and again. Still nothing. The front door hung open, snow-white light pouring through it. The porch looked the same as before, except the rocking chair was gone. Its shape was still visible in the dust, 2 deep grooves where its runners had once been. Beside the mark, I found footprints. Not human ones. They were long, thin, ending in sharp indentations like claws, but there were too many, a dozen. Maybe more pressed deep into the wood, circling the chair, then leading off into the dirt path beyond the fence. I should have run right then. Instead, I followed. The prints wound through the yard, between the dying sunflowers and out toward the tree line. Each step I took sank into the same rhythm, the same soft skitter, skitter, skitter I'd heard on the porch that night. It was faint, but it was there, echoing from somewhere ahead. By the time I reached the first row of pines, the air had changed again. It was heavy, damp, full of a sound just below hearing like distant humming. That's when I saw the trees. Their bark was carved, deep scratches, 12 at a time, spiraling upward like marks of some twisted counting. Between the grooves, the sap oozed dark red instead of amber. I took one more step and felt the ground shift under me. The soil moved breathing, like a chest rising and falling. I stumbled back. The humming grew louder, closer, vibrating through the roots. I could see the pattern now, spreading beneath my feet, connecting every tree like veins, and in the center of it all, a hollow. The earth there was dark and soft, a perfect circle where no grass grew. It looked almost wet. I knew I shouldn't look, but I couldn't help it. I crawled closer, every instinct screaming to stop. When I peered into that pit, I didn't see dirt. I saw eyes, 6 of them, staring up from beneath the soil, waiting. The whispers returned louder now, echoing from below. Not words anymore, just sound, growing in rhythm until it matched my heartbeat. Something moved under the ground. It rose, slowly, patiently. The earth cracked and split, and the smell that poured out was sweet and rotten, like flowers growing in the belly of a grave. The last thing I saw before I truly ran, was the glint of fur slick with mud, and 12 legs, stretching, unfolding from the pit. When I reached the house again, the door was closed. The Bible was gone from my room, but on the table by the window, where Grandma used to set her teacup, sat the rocking chair, perfectly still, and beside it a small pile of dirt. I never found her. Not really. The sheriff said she must have wandered off in the night, lost her footing, maybe fell into the old well near the woods. They filled it in by winter, sealed it with stone. But sometimes, when the crickets go silent and the air turns heavy, I still hear the tapping. 1, 2, pause, 3, and if I look long enough into the window glass, I can still see them 6 faint glimmers in the dark, waiting for me to point. The forest path had changed. It wasn't the same worn trail that my grandmother used to take every morning to collect herbs or gather fallen branches. That path had been narrow but friendly, bordered by soft moss and yellow ferns that brushed your ankles like sleeping cats. Now, it looked hollow. The trees leaned closer, their branches twisting toward each other like blackened fingers sealing an invisible wound. The air hung heavy with the smell of damp bark and iron. No birds sang. Even the cicadas, usually shrieking loud enough to fill your skull, were silent. I knew this was the place, the hollow path. Grandma used to warn me, if you ever see the forest breathe, child, don't follow the path. That's when the shadow walks. But I was older now. I had to know. It had been weeks since Grandma disappeared. The townsfolk said she probably wandered too far and got lost. The woods are cruel to the old, they whispered. But I knew better. I had heard her voice. At first, only at night. A soft humming outside my window. Then, clearer. A whisper calling my name, slow and cracked, like dry twigs bending in the wind. Eli. It sounded like her. But there was something else underneath. A breath too deep, a pulse too low. And then I saw them. 2 faint glows between the trees. Amber, steady, unblinking, just like the stories, just like its eyes. The hollow path began behind the old sycamore where the roots arched like the ribs of a long-dead animal. I stepped through them and felt the temperature drop instantly. My breath misted in the air, even though it was still midsummer. Grandma? I called out. No answer, just the creaking of bark, and somewhere far away the faint scraping of something dragging through the dirt. I told myself it could be a deer, a bear, anything natural, but the sound stopped the moment I did. The deeper I went, the stranger it became. The trees were bleeding. I mean that literally dark, sticky sap oozed from deep cuts in the trunks, smelling faintly metallic. Some of the sap pooled in tiny hollows, black and thick, like congealed blood. My flashlight began to flicker. Grandma. I tried again, louder this time. Something whispered back. Not words, not quite. But it came from everywhere and nowhere, like the forest was breathing through thousands of tiny mouths. I froze. Then soft laughter, a child's laughter. I followed it, though every instinct screamed not to. The laughter echoed along the hollow path, skipping ahead like it was teasing me, pulling me deeper into the dark. And then, abruptly, it stopped. That's when I saw the clearing. It was small, barely wide enough for a car to turn around in, and filled with the remnants of something ancient. A ring of stones, covered in moss. At the center, a tree stump, smooth and blackened as though struck by lightning, and sitting upon it was a cat, or something shaped like one. Its fur shimmered strangely, like oil under moonlight, rippling between gray and violet and pitch black. Its 6 eyes gleamed in 2 neat rows, unblinking. Its 12 legs twitched restlessly, shifting an impossible rhythm. When it moved, it didn't walk, it skittered, as if each leg belonged to a different creature trying to crawl out of it, and I could hear them whispering, hundreds of tiny voices murmuring in unison, filling my head with sound. "We see you. We see you. We see you." "Grandma?" I said again, but it came out as a breath, a plea. The creature tilted its head. Its front eyes narrowed. Then it spoke, not through its mouth, through the forest itself. The sound came from behind me, beside me, inside me. "She walks the hollow path," it said. "She sings for the forest now." My flashlight died. Panic clawed at my throat. I ran blindly, stupidly, branches tearing at my arms. The forest seemed endless, looping back on itself, the same trees repeating like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Behind me, I heard the skittering. Fast, uneven, close. Every few seconds I saw those 6 eyes flash between the trunks. Skitter, 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 skitter. And then, the whisper again. "You came back for her. She remembers you. She remembers the light." I stumbled, fell face first into the mud. When I looked up, I was no longer on the trail. I was in front of my grandmother's house. Except, it wasn't. The cabin looked the same shape, but wrong. Too tall, too thin. Its windows glowed faintly yellow, and I could swear they blinked. The door was slightly open, and I heard humming from inside. Her voice. "Grandma?" My throat trembled. I stepped in. The house smelled of pine resin and rot. Everything was where it should have been. The rocking chair, the old stove, the family photos on the wall. But the pictures had changed. The faces were stretched. Their eyes had multiplied. Every one of them was smiling. "Child." Her voice came from the chair. Grandma sat there, her back turned toward me, shoulders twitching slightly with each breath. Her hair was longer, darker, like wet moss. Her fingers drummed the armrest in a rhythm I recognized. 1 to 2, 1, 2, 3, her lullaby beat. I stepped closer. "Grandma, it's me." She turned. Her face was almost hers, but her eyes were wrong, 6 amber orbs, blinking slowly, independently. Her mouth twisted into something like a smile, and when she spoke, it was with 2 voices. One was hers. The other was the forest's. "You shouldn't have followed the path. I came to find you. You found me." She rose from the chair, her movements boneless, fluid. The floorboards groaned as if resisting her weight. She took 1 step forward, and the shadows under her feet moved before she did, spreading like liquid. Then I saw them 12 limbs crawling beneath her nightgown. Not hers. It's "Grandma," I whispered. The creature inside her smiled wider. She was kind, it said. She offered herself. The forest was hungry. It tilted its head, 6 eyes glimmering in sync. "Now it's your turn." I ran, out the door, through the trees, past the hollow path that seemed to breathe with every step I took. The forest stretched forever, twisting time and direction until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I fell near the sycamore roots where it had all begun. Behind me, the whisper returned. Softer now, almost tender. "We see you. We'll wait. The forest always waits." And then, silence. When I woke, it was morning. The forest was normal again. Birds, wind, sunlight cutting through the leaves, but the path behind the sycamore was gone, completely sealed by new growth. When I went home, the neighbors told me the cabin had burned down during the night. No one could explain how. They found no remains. Sometimes, when I walk near the woods, I hear that lullaby again, faint, drifting through the trees. And if I look too long into the dark, I see 6 eyes watching, still waiting, still whispering. The hollow path never really ends. The sheriff said I should count myself lucky. Lucky that I came out of those woods at all. Lucky that the burns on my hands were only surface deep. Lucky that I hadn't lost my mind completely, like my grandmother had years before. But they didn't see the marks. Under the gauze, my palm still throbbed, not from burns, but from something else. tiny crescent-shaped ridges, 12 of them, pressed into the flesh as if something had held on. I didn't tell anyone, because when I closed my eyes, I could still feel the rhythm of those claws against my skin, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. For weeks after the fire, I stayed in town with my uncle. He kept the blinds drawn tight, saying the woods were cursed, that they took his mother and nearly took me too. He was a heavy drinker, and every night, as the clock neared midnight, he'd mutter the same words before falling asleep in his chair. "Don't answer when it calls." I didn't know what he meant, not until I started hearing it again. The first night it was faint, a soft tapping against the window, like a branch swaying in the wind. Except there was no wind. Then came the sound underneath it. Breathing. Slow. Heavy. Wet. I pulled back the curtain just an inch. The yard was empty except for a trail of prints in the dew. 12 of them, spread unevenly, like someone or something had been crawling on too many limbs. They led straight toward the woods, and something inside me knew. It was calling me back. By the third night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Every flicker of the lamp became a reflection of amber eyes. So I left. I don't remember deciding. One moment I was lying in bed. The next I was standing barefoot outside, moonlight painting the road silver, the forest waiting like an open mouth. The air felt wrong, thick and alive, humming softly like it remembered me. And as I stepped off the asphalt, I heard the whisper again. "Eli," my grandmother's voice. The hollow path was back. It shouldn't have been possible. The area where it had once existed was now overgrown, but as I stepped forward, the undergrowth pulled away from my feet, bending down like blades of grass under rain. The forest opened. I followed the faint glow ahead. It wasn't moonlight, it was something deeper. Like the ground itself was lit from below. The trees swayed, though there was no breeze. The smell of iron grew stronger, and then I saw them. Dozens of shapes crouched in the dark, cats, or things wearing the shape of cats. 12-legged, 6-eyed, their bodies twisted and lean. Some were no larger than rabbits. Others towered as tall as wolves. Their eyes glowed amber, red, gold. They didn't move toward me. They were waiting, and at the center of them all was her, Grandma, or what was left of her. She stood at the base of the blackened stump from before, her arms outstretched. Her skin shimmered faintly, like fur under the skin was trying to break free. "Eli," she said softly, her voice echoing twice. "You came back." I couldn't speak. My throat locked. She stepped closer. Her feet didn't touch the ground. Her eyes, 6 of them now, blinked slowly, like she was trying to remember how to act human. "They're hungry," she whispered. "They always are. The forest must eat, child." I shook my head. "You're not her," she smiled. "I am what she became." The air vibrated. The creatures around us began to stir, their limbs shifting in unison. The earth beneath the stump cracked open. What came out wasn't an animal. It wasn't even a thing that moved by rules I could understand. It was the forest itself, rising, coalescing roots, fur, bone, and shadow forming a single vast shape. Dozens of amber eyes blinked within its mass, glowing like coals. Its voice was the sound of trees bending and splitting. "Feed." The word rattled through the clearing like thunder. Grandma, or the thing that wore her face, turned to me, smiling serenely. "One soul keeps the others asleep," she said. "It's how we survive. One stays. One feeds the rest." Her hand extended toward me. "You came back for me. Now, you can take my place." I ran. The forest came alive behind me. Roots erupted from the soil, snatching at my ankles. The air filled with hissing and laughter, those awful childlike giggles echoing through the dark. "We see you. We know you. You belong to us now." The trees twisted around me, bending their trunks to close the way out. Every path led back to the clearing, no matter where I turned. The whisper came again, softer, closer. "Let it in, Eli. The hunger doesn't stop. You can't run from it. You are it." And Then I saw her again, Grandma, standing between two trees that formed an arch. Her face was peaceful now, like she'd found some strange mercy and surrender. Behind her, the forest was alive, every root and vine moving like veins beneath the earth. "End it," I whispered. She nodded. "Then listen." She began to hum, the same lullaby she used to sing me to sleep. Only now, it was deeper, older. The sound seemed to vibrate through the soil itself. The creatures began to slow, their movements faltering. The forest shuddered. "Keep singing," I begged. Her eyes flickered, all 6 of them dimming one by one. "It always takes a voice," she said. "A new song, a new vessel." And before I could stop her, she stepped backward into the earth. The ground swallowed her whole. Everything went still. Then the soil split open beneath me. Her hand shot up, grabbing my wrist. I tried to pull away, but her grip was iron. The skin of her arm was changing, sprouting fur, darkening, thickening. "Sing," she gasped. "Or it wakes again." The forest trembled, whispering louder now, 1,000 voices overlapping. "Feed, feed, feed," I screamed. But what came out wasn't a scream, it was the tune, the lullaby, her song. The instant the melody left my lips, the earth closed around my legs, the vines tightening. The whispering subsided, fading into a low hum. The forest was listening, and then silence. When I opened my eyes again, it was dawn. The clearing was gone. The path was gone. But I was standing beside the sycamore roots, the air thick with dew. My hands were covered in black sap, and I could hear it faintly, from deep below her voice, humming, still keeping the forest asleep. That was 3 years ago. Now, when I walk past the edge of the woods, children tell stories about me. They say if you stand near the sycamore on a full moon, you can hear a boy singing under the ground. And if you listen too long, you start to hum along. They say the woods stopped growing after that summer. The trees along the ridge froze in place, their leaves dry and gray, their roots sunk deep like anchors in a grave. When the wind passed through them, it didn't whistle, it hummed. Low, continuous, like a song sung from beneath the earth. People in town started calling it the lullaby forest. No one went near it anymore, not after what happened to Eli. It's been 10 years now. The house where he lived with his grandmother has collapsed under vines. The road leading there is just a cracked line through the weeds. But some nights, when the moon turns white as bone, a faint light flickers between the trunks, a pale rhythm that moves, like someone walking with a lantern. That's me. My name's Caleb Turner. I was Eli's friend, maybe his only one, and I came back because the forest still hums my name. The first time I heard it was 2 weeks ago, while fixing fence posts behind my father's barn. The wind carried something strange, a long, wavering tone that shifted between notes like a voice almost forming words. I dropped the hammer. The hum stopped. Then, faintly, almost kindly, I heard, "Taleb." It wasn't Eli's voice. Not exactly, but it remembered him. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time my eyes closed, I saw those 6 golden eyes flicker through the trees, and beneath them, something crawling, something with too many legs. I told myself I'd go once, just to prove it was nothing. I parked at the old dirt road that led to the hollow. The air smelled like copper and rain, though the sky was dry. I followed the sound, that slow, steady hum, until I reached the ridge. The clearing was gone. In its place stood a single tree, the largest I'd ever seen. Its trunk was red as clay, twisting into the clouds, its bark slick like flesh. And from deep within it I could hear the hum vibrating, not from the leaves, not from the wind, but from inside. I stepped closer. The surface of the tree was warm, and when I pressed my ear against it, I heard the song. It wasn't words, just sound, but it moved in patterns that made my stomach knot. The rhythm rose and fell like breathing, like something asleep but dreaming of hunger. Then I heard another tone, higher, fragile, almost human, a voice trying to rise above the rest. "Eli." I don't remember screaming his name, but the forest heard. The hum faltered, broke apart into whispers. The branches trembled. The roots shifted under my boots. And then, for the first time in 10 years, the tree opened its eyes. 6 of them, arranged vertically along the trunk. Amber, alive. The hum returned, louder now, vibrating through my ribs. Something behind those eyes moved. A voice, faint but clear, spoke through the sound. Someone must keep the song. Eli? I whispered. The eyes blinked slowly, and from within the tree came the shape of a face, his face pressing against the bark as though trying to breathe through it. His mouth didn't move, but his voice filled my head. It won't stop. The forest eats sleep, not flesh. Someone must sing to keep it still. I can take you out, I said, pressing my hands against the trunk. I can help you. And he smiled in that same sad way he used to when we were kids. You can't. It's bigger than us now. The roots go everywhere. It's under every hill, every stream. The hunger doesn't die. It just waits. The hum deepened. The ground beneath me pulsed. Then why call me here? I shouted. His answer came like wind through bone. Because I'm tired. The tree shuddered. Cracks opened along its trunk, oozing black sap that steamed against the cold air. From within those cracks, something began to crawl, furred limbs, twitching, wet eyes blinking against the light. The skitter cats. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. They poured out, their 12 legs moving in perfect rhythm, their mouths open in soundless cries. They didn't come for me. They circled the tree, bowed their heads. Then, together, they began to hum. The same lullaby. The same rhythm Eli used to play on his harmonica as a kid. I watched in horror as their bodies began to sink into the roots, melting into the soil like wax. The ground pulsed once more, then went still. The forest fell silent. Only one sound remained, Eli's voice, whispering through the crackling bark. Take it, Caleb. Take the song. Let me sleep. Before I could answer, the roots erupted beneath me, wrapping around my legs. The hum surged again, shaking my bones. My ears filled with the sound until I couldn't hear myself think. Sing, he said. I tried to run, but the roots held me fast. The melody forced itself into my throat. My lips moved on their own, and as the last note left my mouth, everything went black. They found me 3 days later, lying at the base of that red tree. My hair was white. My voice was gone. The sheriff said it was heat stroke, shock, maybe hallucination. They burned the forest that same week, or tried to, but the flames never caught. The trees hummed the whole time. Now, I live on the edge of town. My hands tremble when the wind blows through the fields. Some nights, when I walk outside, I can hear it faintly, that low, patient hum rising from the earth. I can't stop it anymore, because when I close my eyes, the song finishes itself inside me, and I know what Eli meant, that it doesn't eat flesh. It eats kid, and when the silence is gone, the world will finally wake. The crippled shade. The night pressed down on Miller's orchard like a heavy, damp blanket. Moonlight sifted through skeletal branches, illuminating the rough bark and the twisting rows of apple trees that had known better years. The scent of rotting leaves clung to the air, mingling with the faint, metallic tang of frost that had begun to creep across the ground. He had come to check on the north end of the orchard, the part closest to the old creek bed, where the ground sank unevenly, a patchwork of gullies and soft mud. The orchard had belonged to the Petersons once, and Miller had spent more afternoons than he could count under their trees, learning the rhythm of the seasons and the whisper of the wind between the branches. But tonight, the place felt different. He kept his lantern low, afraid that the flame would draw attention, though to what, he did not yet know. His boots crunched over frozen soil, the sound magnified in the stillness. Each step reminded him that the orchard had been empty for a long while, empty except for the memories that refused to leave, and the faint, creeping unease that had settled into his chest ever since he had arrived at the edge of the property. A shadow moved. It was slow, deliberate, almost too deliberate. Miller froze mid-step, hand tightening around the handle of his lantern. His eyes darted along the row of trees. The wind held its breath. Then he saw her, Mrs. Peterson. Or, at least, what appeared to be Mrs. Peterson. She moved in her familiar, halting gait, the kind that had once made children whisper about her in the village. The crutches she had once used were gone, and her limbs seemed unnaturally long and brittle, bending in ways that made Miller's stomach tighten. Her hands reached out toward the branches, brushing lightly against them, as if she were gathering something invisible. "Mornin'," he said, though his voice came out rough, brittle as dry twigs. "Evenin', Mrs. Peterson." There was no acknowledgement. She did not turn, did not slow. She moved down the row with the same mechanical patience, as though each step had been rehearsed in the shadows before the night. Miller took a cautious step forward. The cold cut through his coat, but he felt sweat bead along the back of his neck. "Mrs. Peterson?" he called again, louder this time. "Are you all right?" The figure paused, and for a heartbeat, Miller swore the air itself bent around her. The orchard seemed to darken, though the moon was high and clear. And then, slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes were pale, almost translucent, like ice over still water. And in that gaze, Miller thought he saw not recognition, but something else, an intent that reached past death itself. He swallowed hard. His lantern trembled slightly in his grasp. "You shouldn't be out here. Not tonight." She took a step forward. Her foot struck the frozen soil, and Miller expected a click or a snap from bone on earth. There was nothing. No sound. Only the faintest ripple of frost across the ground where she moved. She was here, but in a way that made no sense. Fear curled low in his gut, cold and immovable. Miller thought of the stories he had heard as a boy. Whispers of those who had been claimed by the orchard. Shadows that lingered beyond the sun. Voices that had no mouth, yet spoke with the authority of the wind. He shook his head, telling himself that the stories were for children, for the naive, for those who had too much time to let imagination overrun sense. And yet, here she was. Her hand lifted and brushed against the lowest branch of a tree, and the apples there seemed to tremble, though no wind stirred. Miller's fingers closed over the handle of his lantern, knuckles white. Every instinct screamed at him to run, yet his feet were rooted to the spot. Something about her presence demanded observation, demanded that he see, even if the vision seared itself into memory. "You shouldn't have come back here," he said finally, his voice steadier than he felt. It's not safe." The figure did not move closer or away. She merely stood, her body, a thin, wavering outline against the moonlight. Her head tilted slightly, as though studying him. Miller felt his own reflection on the lantern's glass flicker, twisting and splitting in ways that made him flinch. The orchard felt alive now, not with the quiet of trees, but with a silent, patient awareness. He could almost hear the soil settling, the branches twitching, as if the earth itself were listening. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone. A single rustle of leaves, the soft exhalation of wind in the path ahead was empty. Miller stepped forward, lantern held high, sweeping the light across the frozen earth, across the tree trunks that seemed now to lean toward him. But she was nowhere. Only the lingering chill, and the feeling that the orchard had exhaled something terrible and unseen. He turned, intending to leave, when a faint sound reached him. A scratching, soft at first, like fingernails against dry wood. He froze, listening. The sound was rhythmic, deliberate. Slowly, it began to multiply, as though more than one set of fingers were scraping against hidden surfaces. His pulse quickened, a dull drumbeat in his ears. Miller moved forward, each step tentative. The orchard twisted around him, the familiar paths now alien and threatening. He remembered his father's warning. Never follow the shadow of a crippled walker in the night, for it leads to more than mischief. It leads to reckoning. He hadn't understood it then. Now, he understood in ways that made his hands shake. A movement at the edge of his vision, a flutter, a flicker. The shadow of legs he could not count made him whirl. There she was again, but not quite. Her form was elongated, unnatural, as though the orchard had stretched her, reshaping her for its own dark amusement. Miller gasped and stumbled back, lantern catching a low branch and sending sparks of light across the frozen earth. She tilted her head, and in that moment, Miller saw the faintest shimmer of something beneath her cloak. A glint of silver, perhaps, or the ghost of something lost. He wanted to look away, to deny it, but his body refused. His senses were taut, strung tight with terror and fascination. "You've come," he whispered, not sure if to her or to the night itself. "You've come for something I don't have." The figure did not answer. And then, as the wind picked up, carrying the bitter scent of soil and rot, the sound of scratching grew louder, now joined by the faintest, mournful whistle, like a child lost in the trees. Miller's heart clenched. The orchard, the shadowed figure, the cold, they were all one thing now. A single entity that had waited and would wait for all who returned unheeding. And then she vanished completely, leaving Miller alone with the orchard, the whispering frost, and the ache of realization. Some debts are older than memory, older than life itself, and some shades do not rest because the world has forgotten them. He sank to his knees in the snow, lantern guttering, breath ragged, unable to shake the image of her malformed, wavering form. The orchard was quiet again, too quiet, and in that silence, Miller understood that he had not been watched merely for trespass or curiosity. He had been observed, measured, and noted, and that one quiet observation was a promise. The orchard did not forget. The crippled shade did not forgive. And somewhere in the night, beyond the reach of moon and light, the earth itself waited, hungry for those who lingered too long among the bones of the past. Miller rose slowly, hands trembling, eyes wide. He retraced his steps toward the farmhouse, boots sinking into frost, mind racing with visions that would not leave him. The trees loomed above, silent sentinels of something older than any man could name, their branches clawing at the wind like waiting hands. And in that cold, unbroken night, Miller knew the orchard had marked him, and that mark would not fade, not in life, nor after. The orchard did not rest after that night. Even as the dawn broke in pale strips of frost-stained light, Miller felt the presence of something beneath the soil, watching, waiting. He had returned to the farmhouse, lantern trembling in hand, but sleep would not come. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the wind through the skeletal branches pressed against his consciousness with the weight of inevitability. By mid-morning, he convinced himself that the shadows had been tricks of the light, the fractured memory of a frail old woman, mixed with the whispering wind. The orchard was empty, silent, and the snow had begun to melt, revealing paths of trampled frost where perhaps he had imagined footprints. And yet, when he stepped back outside to inspect the northern row again, the earth seemed to shiver under his boots, subtle and almost imperceptible. He knelt at the base of a gnarled apple tree, fingers brushing against the frost-bitten soil. Something about the way the dirt clung unnaturally to his gloves unsettled him, as though the earth itself were viscous, alive, and aware. He tried to shake off the sensation, whispering to himself that it was the cold, the fear, and nothing more. But as twilight approached, the air thickened. The sky burned orange and purple, staining the orchard in colors that felt too vivid, too alive, as if the day itself were warning him. Miller moved along the rows, lantern swinging, watching the shadows deepen and twist like restless spirits. Then he heard a soft hum, almost imperceptible, coming from the ground beneath the old creek bed. At first, he thought it was the wind, caught in the hollows of the orchard. But as he leaned closer, peering into the dark soil, the hum became a chorus, voices faint, indistinct, a multitude speaking in whispers that rose and fell like a tide. Miller's skin prickled. It was as though the orchard itself were singing, but the song was hollow, fractured, filled with longing and sorrow. He stepped back, heart hammering. The whispers intensified, a multitude of muted voices chanting in harmony beneath the roots of the trees. His mind tried to rationalize it: underground water, the wind echoing in hollow trunks. But even as he searched for reason, the sensation of being watched intensified. The cold pressed inward, not just on his skin, but on his very chest. Miller swallowed hard. He had known fear before the sting of frostbite, the ache of long hours under the orchard sun, but this was different. This fear had no warmth, no relief. It was patience itself, waiting beneath the soil, ready to claim attention. And then he saw it. Faint depressions in the earth, subtle, not footprints, but impressions that seemed to breathe. The soil rose and fell with a slow, deliberate rhythm, like the chest of something sleeping beneath. He stumbled backward, breath-catching. The orchard had shifted, as though the trees themselves leaned closer, listening, and the whispers became coherent, words breaking through the melody. "We remember. We remember." Miller's hand shook as he lifted his lantern higher. The pale light cast long shadows that danced over the trees, over the subtle mounds in the soil, over the rows where the apples had once ripened freely. The orchard seemed older now, older than memory, as though it had held these voices for decades, perhaps centuries, biding time until someone walked too close. And then he heard it not from the ground, but from the direction of the orchard road, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like the staccato steps of a cane on hard earth. He turned sharply, but nothing moved in the dim light. Only the orchard, vast and unyielding, stretching into the darkening horizon. As night fell, the hum of the buried choir rose. Miller could no longer tell if it was a dream or reality. He felt the vibrations through his boots, through the soles of his feet, as if the ground itself were alive with memory, echoing sorrow that had long been buried. He knelt, pressing his hands against the soil, and for a moment he imagined he could feel them, the ghosts, or perhaps something older, stirring beneath the surface, trying to speak through the silence. A shadow passed over him then, not hers, not the crippled shade he had seen, but another presence entirely, taller, broader, rooted in the orchard, moving in ways the eye could not follow. Miller's breath caught, and he realized the whispers had become a chorus of accusation, a litany of grievances long unspoken. "Why do you walk here? Why do you disturb us?" His legs gave out, and he sank to the ground. The lantern fell, rolling and casting a weak arc of light that trembled across the frost. The chorus surged, and the cold became unbearable, pressing in, an inescapable weight that made his bones ache. He tried to speak, tried to call out an apology, but no sound emerged. And then he saw them hands, pale, long-fingered, protruding from the earth, grasping toward the sky. Not one set, but dozens, all reaching from beneath the orchard soil. They did not move with speed, but with inevitability. Miller's stomach churned as he realized these were the missing, the buried, the voices that had hummed and whispered, those who had vanished in the orchard, whose stories had been swallowed by time. And now they were surfacing, drawn by the living presence that dared disturb their slumber. He tried to scramble to his feet, but the orchard seemed to shift around him, rows elongating unnaturally, branches twisting like limbs to block his path. The whispers coalesced into words he could almost understand, a command or a lament. "You see us. You hear us. Remember us." The air grew dense, almost viscous, carrying the scent of earth and decay. Miller's lantern flickered, throwing the shadows of reaching hands across the orchard in jagged, impossible angles. He felt himself being pulled, not physically, but mentally, as though the orchard were dragging him into the soil, into the choir that had been waiting beneath the frost. A sudden, sharp snap, a branch breaking, snapped him back. He gasped and ran, stumbling through the rows, lantern swinging. Each step brought him closer to the edge of the orchard, yet the chorus pursued, faint now, haunting the spaces between his breaths. The hands receded, the whispers fading, leaving only the echo of memory in the cold night air. By the time he reached the farmhouse, The first tendrils of moonlight had touched the horizon. Miller collapsed on the porch, shaking, breathless, eyes wide. He looked back once, toward the orchard. It seemed normal again. The snow melting in the gentle dawn, the trees standing straight and silent. Nothing stirred, and yet he knew it had not been a trick. The buried choir existed. He had seen it, felt it, heard it. They were not vengeful. Exactly, not in the way of sudden violence, but in their patience, in their permanence. The orchard kept its debts. The buried remembered, and Miller, who had returned to the rose unbidden, had been noticed. Days later, he would try to speak of it, to warn others, but words failed him. All he could offer were the trembling hands, the hollowed eyes of the orchard trees, and the memory of hands reaching from beneath the soil. Each night, the whispers came back in dreams, a distant, unending choir that sang, not songs, but reminders, that some places are repositories of memory, and some debts are not cleared by leaving. Miller never returned to the north end of the orchard again. He tended the rest of the trees during the day, keeping the fruit harvested and the paths cleared, but he did not cross that silent, frost-bitten row. And though the orchard seemed quiet to anyone who passed, to Miller it was alive with breath and eyes and voices that had waited too long, patient and unyielding, beneath the frost, beneath the soil, beneath the very ground he walked upon. He had seen the choir buried. He had felt the roots of their persistence. And in every shadow that stretched across the orchard after nightfall, he could feel the waiting, an invisible presence that whispered in voices older than the wind, "We are here. We remember. You will remember too." The orchard seemed quieter that night, or perhaps it was Miller's mind that had grown accustomed to the murmurs beneath the soil. The snow had mostly melted, leaving patches of soggy earth, but the frost clung stubbornly to the northern row. Even from the farmhouse porch he could see the soil there shimmer slightly under the moonlight, as if it were breathing. He tried to ignore it, telling himself that what he had witnessed was a warning, not a summons. But warnings, as he was learning, were only invitations in disguise. He followed the path to the orchard again, lantern swinging, heart pounding with a caution that felt both rational and irrational. The cold had seeped into his bones, the wind pressing against his coat like a living thing. Miller moved slowly, deliberately, each footstep sinking slightly into the softened earth, leaving imprints that he feared might vanish into shadows before morning. The northern row had changed. What he had assumed were irregularities in the soil now appeared deliberate mounds rising and falling like the backs of sleeping creatures. He approached cautiously, kneeling beside one. The ground was damp, darkened with moisture, and the faint scent of iron hit his nostrils, sharp and unmistakable. It was blood, or something like it. Not fresh, not stinking, but metallic, woven into the soil itself. And then he saw the hollow. It was subtle at first, a shallow indentation between two apple trees, easily mistaken for an animal burrow or a divot left by erosion. But as he squinted into the dim lantern light, the hollow deepened, and a reddish tint seeped from the earth, staining the surrounding frost. Miller's stomach clenched. Something had been buried here recently, something that had not decomposed according to nature's rules. He leaned closer, and a whisper tickled his ear, not a voice in words, but a vibration, almost musical, as if the earth itself were humming. The buried choir from before, but more insistent now, calling him closer. "Come. Look. Remember." The lantern trembled in his hand. Miller wanted to step back, to retreat to the warmth of the farmhouse and forget the northern row ever existed. But curiosity, that old, foolish curiosity, compelled him forward. He knelt at the edge of the hollow, peering into its darkness. The soil was loose, freshly turned, and the deeper he looked, the more it seemed to pulse, subtly, unnaturally. Then he saw a small, red-stained handprint on the side of the hollow, as if something or someone had struggled to escape. Miller's breath caught in his throat. He had thought the choir beneath the orchard were just whispers and hands reaching from the soil, but this was physical, undeniable. Someone had been buried here, and the earth had not let them rest quietly. He stepped back, but the earth shifted beneath his feet. A low rumble echoed through the orchard, subtle at first, then growing, like the deep exhalation of something immense and patient. Miller froze, lantern shaking in his hand. The mounds rose and fell, forming shapes that suggested torsos, heads, limbs. The red stains grew more vivid, streaking across the frost and soil like ink and water. And then he saw the shadow. It was not a shadow cast by moonlight, but something more deliberate, darker than darkness itself. It slithered across the hollow, stretching and curling in impossible ways, moving with an intelligence that made the hair on Miller's neck stand on end. It paused, and he thought he could see the shape of a figure crouched at the edge of the hollow. A small, twisted body, with limbs too long, fingers gnarled and grasping. Miller swallowed hard. The wind died suddenly, and the orchard seemed to hold its breath. In that silence, he heard the choir again, louder this time, voices layered one upon the other, a cacophony of grief and mourning. Turn back. Leave this place. Remember, but do not linger. The shadow shifted again, and for a moment, Miller thought it moved toward him. He stumbled backward, nearly dropping the lantern. His hands gripped the metal, trying to steady himself. The hollow pulsed, and he realized with dawning horror that it wasn't just a depression in the earth. It was a mouth, an opening, alive with intent, stained with red soil that clung to the edges like fingernails. He wanted to scream, but no sound would come. The orchard around him seemed to warp, trees leaning unnaturally, branches bending toward the hollow. The air was thick with the scent of iron and decay, and every breath Miller drew felt laden with the memory of something long buried and never forgiven. Then he saw the first figure emerge, not fully, just a head, pale and wet with frost and soil, followed by a second, a third, until the hollow seemed crowded with bodies that moved slowly, deliberately, climbing from the earth with a haunting grace. Their eyes were dark, empty hollows that reflected no light, yet he felt them watching, always watching. Miller stumbled backward, tripping over roots and frost. The choir swelled, not in sound, but in pressure, pressing against his chest and shoulders as if the earth itself were demanding recognition. The hollow widened, a gaping maw of red-stained soil, and more figures emerged, reaching, twisting, climbing out with a rhythm that seemed to anticipate his every move. In a sudden moment of clarity, he realized the hollow was not just a grave, it was a threshold. The buried choir had risen to remind him, to punish him, to ensure that the debt of memory was paid. And in their silent, relentless ascent, he saw what he had feared. The orchard's northern row was a repository, a place where the dead, the lost, and the forgotten converged. He turned and ran. The frost-crusted grass tore at his boots. The trees stretched impossibly long, catching at his coat and sleeves. Behind him, the hollow pulsed and breathed, and he felt hands, dozens of hands brush his ankles, tug at his sleeves, whispering promises of remembrance and warning. He burst through the southern edge of the orchard, heart hammering, lungs burning. The farmhouse lights glimmered ahead, but the memory of what he had seen followed him, a presence that no door or threshold could bar. He collapsed on the porch, gasping, lantern swinging wildly in his hands. Even as the dawn bled into the sky, the hollow remained. Miller could see it now, faint beneath the frost and dirt, a maw of red soil that pulsed as though alive. The buried choir had claimed its night, but the memory of it lingered, pressing against his mind like a shadow that refused to leave. And in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the orchard and the frostbitten branches swayed, Miller knew one thing. The red hollow had awakened. It had shown him the cost of curiosity, the persistence of memory, and the inevitability of the orchard's claim. No matter how far he ran, no matter how hard he tried to forget, the hollow, the choir, and the reaching hands would follow him in his dreams, in his thoughts, in the silent, patient pulse beneath the soil. He never spoke of it again. Not to neighbors, not to friends, not even to himself. The orchard demanded silence, and Miller, though alive, became its quiet witness. The red hollow waited, and the buried choir watched, patient, inexorable, reminding anyone who might stumble too close that the dead do not rest when remembered, and some places keep their secrets with hands that claw from the earth. The orchard had not forgotten the night of the red hollow. Even weeks later, Miller walked its rows with a nervous vigilance, eyes flicking to every patch of dark soil, every gnarled branch that might conceal another secret. The air felt thicker here, saturated with a memory that was not entirely his own, a weight pressing down in the rhythm of his heartbeat. Each step on the frozen ground seemed to echo in time with something far below, something patient, waiting. He had tried to resume normal life. Lessons were taught, rows tended, fences repaired, and yet he could not shake the sense of being observed. The orchard's northern row remained a locus of dread, a wound in the land that pulsed beneath his feet, whispering of the buried choir. He could not ignore it any longer. The voices had grown louder in his dreams, a chorus of fractured tones demanding attention. That evening, Miller set out toward the northern edge once more, lantern in hand, bracing himself against the chill that had settled deep in his bones. The wind had risen slightly, rustling the corn stalks and shaking loose dead leaves that skittered across the frost. He walked carefully, boots crunching softly in the half-frozen mud, ears straining for any sound beyond his own heartbeat. He paused by the hollow. It had changed since the last night, widening subtly, edges ragged and bleeding into the surrounding earth. Something stirred beneath it, something that pressed upward, testing the limits of the soil that confined it. He saw movement, a thin, pale arm, flicking in hesitation, fingers splayed against the dirt. His throat tightened. The buried choir was not at rest. It never would be. Miller dropped to his knees, lantern casting long, trembling shadows across the orchard. The ground at the hollow trembled, a low rumble that he could feel through his palms. It was not the sound of earth shifting naturally. It was deliberate, hungry, the slow, dragging stir of a mass beneath the soil. The buried choir was reaching, pulling, clawing toward the surface. The first figure emerged. A childlike shape, small and thin, coated in the wet, reddish soil of its tomb. Eyes dark and hollow, mouth open in an expression of mute horror, hands scraping the earth with a persistence that spoke of desperation and malice in equal measure. Miller's stomach roiled, and he fought the instinct to flee. More shapes followed, each rising in turn, grotesque reflections of the orchard's past. Children and adults, faces pressed with the anguish of forgotten deaths, arms bent at impossible angles, fingers nalo. The choir was no longer silent, the earth now exhaling a chorus of muffled moans and low, resonant hums that vibrated through his chest. It was a soundless sound, felt more than heard, a pressure that sought to claim him as much as it sought release. Miller tried to speak, to call out, but his voice faltered under the weight of the orchard's memory. The ground shifted more violently, forcing him backward, forcing him to his knees. He could see them now, fully, a dozen figures, struggling through mud and frost, their faces a blend of terror and accusation. They were hungry not for food, not for flesh, but for recognition, for acknowledgement of their being, for the world to remember that they had been here, and that the orchard had stolen them. He leaned closer to the hollow, compelled by the same foolish curiosity that had drawn him before. Something moved at the center of the pit. A child, no older than Tommy, the boy from the first whisper of the orchard's secret. Blood matted his hair, his small hands reaching upward, as if trying to grasp something just beyond reach. The hollow soil shifted in rhythm with his movements, almost sentient, almost aware. Miller felt a pulse in the ground, a heartbeat that resonated with his own. It was not merely the choir moving, it was the orchard itself, the earth beneath the rows of corn and apple trees, alive with memory and hunger. He understood then that the orchard had become a mouth, and the buried choir were its teeth, gnawing endlessly on the boundary between life and death, demand and obedience. And then he felt the tug. Something gripped his ankle beneath the soil, icy and strong. He stumbled, lantern crashing to the ground, light flaring across the orchard like a flare in the night. More hands rose from the hollow, pale and slick with dirt, fingers twisting and curling, grasping at his boots, pulling him closer to the mouth of the earth. Miller struggled, kicking and reaching, but the hollow's grip was relentless. He could see faces now, twisted in expressions that were both imploring and threatening, eyes dark voids reflecting his own fear. The choir's song was louder here, no longer a whisper but a tide of sound pressing into his mind, urging him downward, urging him to join them, urging him to remember the forgotten, the dead, the stolen. He clawed at the soil, fingers sinking into mud, frost, and blood-stained earth. The orchard seemed to close in around him, trees bending inward, their branches snapping and creaking in unnatural angles. The hollow widened slightly with each second, a mouth yawning beneath the orchard floor, red-streaked soil pulsing with anticipation. In a desperate act, Miller seized the lantern and threw it into the hollow. The light flared across faces, revealing their humanity, and then for a moment, the chorus faltered, a beat of silence where the world seemed to breathe. He yanked at his boots with renewed strength, staggering backward as if expelled by some unseen force. The orchard released him, and he collapsed into the frosted grass. The hollow contracted again, pulling the buried choir back into the soil, but the memory of their presence lingered in the damp, metallic air. Miller lay there for long moments, chest heaving, eyes wide, ears straining for the slightest sound beyond his own rapid breathing. He rose slowly, knowing he could not linger. The orchard had fed its hunger for the night, but its memory remained, and he understood that it would call again. The red hollow, the buried choir, and the hunger beneath were patient. They did not forget, and they did not forgive. As he walked back toward the farmhouse, the frost crunching softly underfoot, Miller felt the orchard's eyes on him. Or perhaps it was his own memory of what he had seen. The northern row stretched ahead, silent, sinister, and indifferent. Somewhere deep beneath, the choir rested, teeth bared in anticipation, waiting for the next intrusion, the next curious hand, the next soul to wander too close. By the time he reached the house, dawn was bleeding into the sky, painting frost and soil in dull gold. He did not sleep that morning, did not eat, did not speak. The orchard's pulse had entered his own rhythm, and he knew that he would never again walk its rows without the weight of the buried choir pressing at his mind. The hunger beneath was patient, eternal, and he had seen only its surface. It would wait for him, and for anyone who dared follow, in silence, in shadows, in the red soil of the northern row. Night had returned to the orchard like a tide, thick and suffocating, swallowing the weak glimmer of the farmhouse lights in a haze of shadow. Miller walked the familiar path again, compelled by a restless unease he could no longer ignore. Every step was heavy with the memory of the buried choir, every breath a thin thread against the cold, damp air. He carried no lantern this time, relying on moonlight to navigate the rows of corn and apple trees, though the faint glow seemed to retreat from him, leaving patches of blackness that writhed at the edge of vision. The northern row called to him most of all. He had tried to avoid it for weeks, pretending the earth's hunger was only a memory, a trick of fear and exhaustion. But the orchard had no interest in tricks. It demanded acknowledgement, and tonight it had claimed Miller's attention again. He felt the pull beneath his feet, subtle at first, then insistent, as if the roots themselves were stirring, reaching toward him, whispering the names of those they had swallowed. The buried choir was patient, but patience was endless in the dark soil. He knelt at the edge of the hollow, the frozen earth biting at his knees through his worn trousers. He could see faint undulations beneath the snow-streaked dirt, subtle movements that suggested the soil was not inert, that it had a life of its own. Miller's fingers grazed the surface, and a shiver of cold ran up his arm, deeper than the winter air could explain. Beneath him, the choir waited, hungry, a congregation of the stolen, the silenced, the lost. A low hum began, almost imperceptible, rising from the hollow like the beginning of a chant. The tones were wrong, discordant, vibrating in his chest in ways that made his teeth ache. He recognized it instinctively as the lullaby, the call of the maw, the earth's mouth, coaxing him closer, warning him, claiming him even before it touched him. His pulse quickened, but a strange calm overtook his fear, a compulsion that pressed him forward despite the warnings. And then, he saw them. The pale hands, countless in number, breaking through the soil with slow deliberation. Fingers gnarled with mud and root fibers, nails blackened and sharp as obsidian. Miller's stomach roiled, but he could not look away. The chorus began to take shape, figures rising slowly, their eyes hollow, mouths opening in silent song. It was not a sound one heard, it was felt, resonating in the marrow, in the spaces between thoughts. He realized then that the maw's lullaby was not merely a song. It was an invocation. The orchard itself sang through the choir, calling forth the dead to dance, to weave their terrible patience into something almost sentient. The northern row was no longer a boundary between soil and air. It was a veil, thin as breath, separating the living from the dead. Miller's knees hit the earth. He watched as one figure rose fully from the hollow, a child he did not recognize, yet somehow familiar. Its eyes were deep hollows, its mouth open in a perpetual lament. It extended a hand toward him, long fingers twitching as if testing the weight of his soul. He recoiled, but the pull of the earth was magnetic. Step by step the choir emerged, a congregation of those who had vanished, a dozen, then 2 dozen, faces twisted with grief and accusation. The ground trembled under him, the orchard thrumming with a rhythm that matched his own racing pulse. Miller's vision blurred, the moonlight scattering across the orchard in fractured patterns that seemed to dance with the figures. He knew, with a dreadful clarity, that if he stepped closer, he would not return. Yet, to step back felt impossible, as if the orchard itself had entwined his shadow in its roots. A voice rose in his mind, not spoken aloud but felt in the marrow of his bones. Join us, remember us, feed the hunger. The childlike figure from the hollow extended a hand again, and Miller's own arm lifted, drawn almost against his will. The choir's presence pressed against his chest, and he could smell the soil, the rot, the sweet tang of iron and decay. The maw was patient, but it always reached for the living, always sought new bodies to shape, new songs to swell its chorus. He stumbled backward, tripping over a gnarled root. The choir surged forward, silent in movement, yet loud in presence, a tide of hands and faces, their hollow eyes pleading, demanding. Miller's mind screamed with the awareness of the orchard's nature. It was alive. It consumed memory and marrow alike. It did not forgive. It only remembered. The buried choir was the voice of the orchard itself, a song of reclamation, a hymn for the stolen. Frantically, Miller scrambled toward the edge of the northern row, the choir's fingers grazing the hem of his coat, cold as frostbite. He burst through the trees into the open cornfield, lungs burning, heart hammering. Behind him, the orchard sighed, the hollow retreating into silence, leaving only the faint tremor in the soil, the whisper of leaves that might have been voices. He did not stop until he reached the farmhouse, throwing himself inside, slamming the door and bolting it. Sweat and frost mixed on his skin, breath ragged, hands trembling. The lantern was gone, smashed in his flight, leaving only moonlight through the windows, pale and accusatory. For long minutes, he sat huddled on the floor, listening. Nothing stirred, nothing moved. And yet, he knew they had not vanished. Not truly. By dawn, Miller understood the truth. The orchard was a maw, endless and patient. Its lullaby was eternal, sung to anyone who dared near, anyone who remembered, anyone who carried curiosity or doubt. The buried choir would rise again, in silence, in shadow, in the rhythm of the earth, calling the living into their song. And the orchard would wait, always. He left the northern row that morning with hands raw and spirit fractured. He planted no more seed there, avoided the soil, avoided the hollow. But the memory followed him, and in every wind that rustled the leaves, in every frost that cracked beneath his boots, he could hear it. The faint, persistent echo of a lullaby, sung beneath the orchard, sung by the maw that never slept. sung to remind him that the dead do not rest so long as the living dare to walk over them. Miller knew he could never speak of it, not truly. Words failed to capture the gravity of the orchard's hunger, the weight of its patience. To remember was to invite it, and to speak was to call it. He would tend the fields, he would live, he would sleep in fitful hours, but always he carried the lullaby in his mind, a song of earth and shadow, of hunger and patience, of a choir that waited beneath, and of a maw that never let go. Even as he aged, the northern row remained inviolate, unplowed, avoided. The orchard itself had marked it sacred. No one ventured there, not willingly, and when the wind whispered through the leaves, Miller swore he could hear faint murmurs of the buried choir, the echo of small hands scraping against soil, the low, eternal rhythm of the maw's lullaby. And he knew, without doubt, that those who had vanished in the orchard's long memory were singing still, beneath the frost and mud, a chorus that would never end, a hunger that would never sleep. The aspens' applause. The heat of the Colorado summer pressed against the mountainside like a living weight. Even as dusk fell, the air seemed sticky, unwilling to move, carrying the scent of pine resin and the dry whisper of the wind. At the edge of a clearing, the great aspen tree stood, its trunk wide and gnarled with a century of storms and seasons, its leaves trembling faintly in the warm breeze. Locals called it the 100-year aspen, and most avoided it. Muttering of curses and warnings about the poplar clapped the sound of hands that were not hands, 1,000 spectral applauses, said to come when the tree's spirits were awake. It was foolishness, of course, but youth is stubborn, and curiosity even more so. I was a teacher then, still young, brimming with disbelief in any superstition. Along with 2 friends, we had decided to escape the unbearable heat, setting up camp under the tree's enormous canopy. 3 of us could not have encircled its base, even if we tried. The bark was rough beneath our hands, the trunk towering pale in the dying light, a sentinel watching the world. We laughed at the stories, shaking our heads at the notion that leaves could have tongues, or that the sound of them stirring could be the applause of demons. The sun dipped below the peaks, leaving long shadows that stretched into the clearing, staining the ground with deep purple. Crickets chirped in the twilight, their song unnervingly loud in the stillness. The scent of earth and moss was thick, and even the forest seemed to pause, listening. We lay on our backs, staring up through the branches. The leaves shimmered faintly, catching the last light like shards of glass, each trembling in a breeze too faint to feel. I felt a strange sensation, as if the tree itself was aware of us, its breath slow and deliberate. I brushed it off as imagination and rolled over, closing my eyes. Hours passed. Sleep claimed us, heavy and dreamless at first. Then, just past midnight, a sound woke me. At first, I thought it was the wind, a rustle among the leaves, but it was no wind I had ever known. It was rhythmical, impossible, like a stadium full of hands clapping in unison, loud and close. Pop, pop, pop. Each clap reverberated in my chest, a cold hammering that made my ribs ache. I sat up, heart thundering, and the others stirred beside me, murmuring in confusion. The sound grew. It was not random. It was deliberate, a cadence of malice and mockery. I peered into the darkness above, my eyes straining to see between the dense leaves, and then I noticed something impossible. Among the black silhouettes of the branches, faint glimmers of white swayed too many to count, moving in synchronized pulses. My breath caught as I realized. Each white shape was a leaf, yes, but each leaf had eyes. Small, blinking, unblinking, amber lights that reflected the faint moon, watching me, my friends, with impossible intent. I wanted to speak, to call out, but my tongue felt frozen. The applause grew louder, surrounding us, bouncing off the mountain walls and filling the clearing with a sound that was alive, that mocked us with every measured pop. The crickets fell silent. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. We scrambled to our feet, stumbling over roots and uneven earth. The tree seemed taller now, closer, almost leaning toward us. Leaves twisted unnaturally, turning to face us in unison, their blinking eyes numerous, their gaze unbearable. I grabbed the arm of my friend, dragging him along, and we ran, breathless, pounding across the clearing, hearts hammering in the echo of that relentless applause. Behind us, I swear I heard whispers in the rhythm of the leaves, voices melding with the pop, faint but intelligible. You should not have come. You should not have looked. A warning carried in the cadence of a 100-year-old tree, in the breath of something ancient and resentful. We reached the edge of the clearing and dared to look back. The leaves settled slightly, though the white shape still lingered, almost floating, watching, waiting. The sound dimmed, yet left a ringing in our ears that would not fade. The mountain seemed still again, but I knew the aspen had not forgotten us, nor forgiven our trespass. We collapsed at the base of a smaller tree, trembling and gasping, aware that no words could capture what we had witnessed. The poplar clap, the spectral eyes, the deliberate cadence of a tree older than any memory we possessed. It was real, and it had noticed us. That night changed everything. Skepticism had turned into awe, awe into terror, and terror into respect. The aspen's applause was not mere superstition, not a trick of wind or imagination. It was a warning, a mark left by something that had lived longer than any human and watched us long before we arrived. I never returned to that clearing alone, never dared sleep beneath its branches again. Even years later, when teaching, I would hear the faint pop, pop, pop in the corner of my mind, a reminder that some places, some trees, some whispers of the forest are not meant for the living. And in the quiet of summer nights, when the wind is still and the leaves tremble, I remember the eyes of the aspen, blinking patiently, waiting for the next to hear its applause. The next day, the sun seemed indifferent to what had occurred. Its pale rays spilled over the Colorado peaks, warming the air without stirring a breeze. Yet beneath that glaring light, the aspen loomed, its branches still trembling faintly, as if sighing after the night's exertion. I couldn't bring myself to look directly at it. Something about the tree made the skin crawl even in daylight, as if the clapping hadn't ceased, it had only withdrawn, gathering patience. I told my friends what I'd seen, but their disbelief was instant and fervent. "It's just the wind," one said, nervously kicking at the dry pine needles. "You're letting your imagination run wild." Yet when we walked through the clearing together, the canopy's shadow fell heavier than it should have, stretching unnaturally, the faint rustle of leaves almost like a whisper threaded through it. A cadence, subtle but present, like the remnants of last night's applause. I returned the next evening, drawn by a combination of fear and fascination. The heat had lifted, leaving the air crisp and sharp, scented faintly of crushed leaves and resin. Standing beneath the aspen, I ran my hand along its rough bark, feeling the grooves and ridges of its ancient trunk. The bark was dry and firm, yet I sensed movement within, a faint pulse I could not explain. The whispers began as soon as twilight fell. Faint at first, like the rustle of many tiny wings, or the soft brushing of silk over skin. I strained to listen, heart hammering, and realized the whispers formed words or something like them. The sounds were imperfect, halting, as if struggling to convey meaning through shapes of leaves. "Do you see? Do you know?" I froze. The voice was layered, plural yet singular, as if many had gathered into one. The leaves above me twitched, responding to my stillness, their tiny white shapes catching the moonlight. Each leaf seemed to blink independently, then in unison, forming a rhythm that mimicked speech. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here," they whispered again, repeating, each syllable carried in the subtle vibration of the tree itself. The sound was both soft and suffocating, pressing against my ears until the world narrowed to the space between me and the aspen. I wanted to retreat, to flee, but my body refused. My limbs felt heavy, weighted by some unseen gravity, and my mind was filled with the overlapping whispers, the insistence that I hear, that I understand. I realized that the tree was not only observing, it was communicating, though the language was alien, as if centuries of life and death had been folded into its leaves. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time had lost its meaning beneath the aspen's canopy. The whispers intensified, harmonizing into chords, notes that pricked at the mind rather than the ear. I could feel them in my chest, vibrating through ribs, a chorus of something alive yet not alive, something older than memory. I stumbled, hands pressed to my ears, but the sound did not relent, and then a leaf brushed my shoulder. Not a mere rustle, but a deliberate touch like the tip of a finger grazing skin. I jerked away, heart leaping. The leaf twitched, hovering briefly before falling to the forest floor. On it, faintly, were markings. Symbols? Letters? I could not tell. My breath caught in my throat, and for the first time, I understood the aspen was aware of me, not merely as an intruder, but as a participant. I spent the night there, unable to sleep. Every snap of a twig, every distant hoot, felt amplified through the tree's whispering chorus. I caught shadows in the corner of my eye, white shapes, moving in subtle patterns across the dark canopy. I understood, with a deep, visceral certainty, that each leaf was a watcher, each leaf an eye, each leaf a messenger. By dawn, the whispers had ceased, retreating into the quiet hum of morning. I sat on the cold forest floor, trembling, aware that something had shifted. I had been marked, or at least noted, by the aspen's consciousness. It did not strike me, did not chase me. It simply had acknowledged my presence, and, in doing so, had made me part of its domain. When I returned to town, I spoke cautiously to locals, hoping to gauge their knowledge. Few had dared approach the aspen at night, and those who had spoke only in fragments, warning that the tree would know your heart or measure your soul. They laughed at my pale face and trembling hands, dismissing it as childish fear. But I knew. I had felt the tree's mind brushing against mine, probing, assessing, testing, and I realized the aspen's power was not in physical force, but in perception, in patience, in the subtle art of terror, the knowledge that someone or something could be watching at all times, and that even leaves could hold awareness, could whisper in unison, could claim a presence. By evening, I returned once more. The whispers had changed. They no longer spoke to me in fragments, but in long, drawn-out syllables like a lullaby, ancient and terrible. They hummed through the branches, through the trunk, through my bones. I understood that this was the tree's language now, and though I could not fully comprehend it, I felt its intent. The aspen's applause had given way to its song, a continuous reminder that the forest belonged to something other, something patient and eternal. I left the clearing before night fully fell, yet the memory lingered. Every crackle of leaves in the town breeze, every shiver of poplar in the evening wind, reminded me of that whispered chorus. Even years later, the sound returned in dreams, faint, yet insistent, and I knew the aspen was still speaking, still waiting, its 100-year-old consciousness weaving a web that reached beyond mere branches and leaves. I never doubted again that trees could remember, could communicate, could warn, and perhaps, in their own incomprehensible way, could punish. The aspen's whispers were the first step toward understanding that some things in the mountains were alive, not just in body, but in mind and intent. Some things, like the aspen, never forget and never forgive. By the third night, the air had grown thick with the musk of summer decay, a humid weight that made every movement sluggish. The aspen stood taller and more menacing than I remembered, its leaves fluttering faintly even without a breeze, as if the tree exhaled softly in the darkness. I approached the clearing with the caution of a man who had seen too much, yet could not resist knowing more. The canopy above had shifted, tinged with red in the glow of the half-moon, though the leaves themselves were green. I couldn't explain the hue. It was like the color of dried blood refracted through candlelight, a distortion of natural perception. Shadows stretched unnaturally from the tree's trunk, like fingers pressing against the forest floor. I crouched near the base, feeling the rough bark beneath my palms, and listened. The whispers had returned, more coherent now, less fragmented than before. They spoke in a cadence that mimicked speech, yet carried the cadence of the wind and the rhythm of leaves brushing against one another. We see. We remember. We mark. The words seemed to emerge from every leaf at once, a symphony of tiny motions. I turned my head slowly, noticing the red glow pooling higher in the canopy, illuminating shapes that weren't there before, forms of faces, faint and fleeting, as if the tree held memories of those who had perished beneath it over decades. My skin prickled, my chest tightened. The deeper I pressed into the clearing, the more I sensed a pulse running through the aspen. Not a heartbeat, but a thrum, like the resonance of 1,000 whispers pressed into a single will. I realized that each leaf was not merely passive. Each leaf was a vessel, a recorder of observation, capable of retaining impressions of those who passed under it. And now it was studying me. I stepped closer to the reddish glow, and my foot caught something on the forest floor, a small crumpled piece of parchment, yellowed and brittle. I unfolded it, hands shaking. The ink had faded, but a single phrase remained legible. Leave or join the chorus. A sudden movement above startled me. The branches quivered violently, then stilled, and the red hue intensified. Leaves shimmered like a tide of crimson eyes, each blinking independently, then in concert fixing on me. The realization struck hard. The aspen did not just watch. It judged. It claimed. I stumbled back, heart racing, and the whispers grew louder, forming a low, undulating chant. Words overlapped and merged, a sound that was both song and warning. I felt dizzy, as if the force itself was bending my perception, stretching and warping reality. The red light flickered over the ground, revealing faint impressions like footprints, but not human, not animal. Something in between, leading deeper into the shadowed grove. I hesitated. Part of me knew I should retreat, yet another, darker part urged me forward. The forest around me was alive, in a way that no ordinary tree could ever be. I could feel the collective consciousness of the aspen pressing against my mind, probing, coaxing, daring me to test the limits of my courage. Slowly, almost unconsciously, I followed the footprints, each step taking me deeper under the swaying canopy. The whispers became a chorus, rising and falling with a rhythm that mirrored my own heartbeat. I glimpsed movement in the corner of my vision. Shapes of long-dead children, travelers, perhaps even the unlucky who had dared approach before me, their forms flickering between leaf and shadow. The red canopy thickened overhead, and the air grew dense, suffused with an otherworldly warmth that contrasted the cold bite of night I had felt earlier. The whispering chorus swelled to a cacophony, overlapping with a strange metallic sound like thousands of tiny claps pressed into the leaves themselves. My ears throbbed. My mind strained to separate reality from illusion. I pressed my hands to my ears and sank to my knees, gasping, and then silence. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the red canopy above dimming to a dull glow. I dared a glance upward. A single leaf, perfectly crimson, floated down and landed before me. Inscribed on its surface was a symbol, geometric yet organic, a mark that seemed to pulse faintly as I stared. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the red shimmer faded. The canopy returned to normal green. The whispers softened to murmurs, and the pulse through the tree eased. Yet the impression remained. The aspen had offered me a glimpse of its true consciousness, a warning encoded in blood, tinted light, and whispered chorus. I stumbled back to the edge of the clearing, exhausted and trembling. The forest around me returned to the mundane night, the cicadas and crickets filling the spaces between tree trunks. But I could not forget what I had seen. The red canopy, the whispered song, the feeling that the aspen could, at any moment, extend its perception beyond leaves and bark into the very marrow of my bones. Even as I returned home, the sight of ordinary trees felt wrong. Every leaf seemed suspect, every rustle a potential whisper, every shadow a possible witness. I knew the aspen's consciousness had reached out and touched me, and I was forever changed. Its vigilance was not merely a legend or superstition. It was a living, aware force, patient and calculating, waiting for those who dared walk beneath its boughs at night. That night, I slept fitfully, dreaming of thousands of eyes blinking in unison, a red canopy stretching endlessly above me, a song of leaves that promised both revelation and doom. And I understood. with a chilling clarity that my journey under the aspen was far from over. The following night, the air was heavier than before, as if the forest itself had drawn a deep, expectant breath, waiting for me to return. The sun had set hours ago, leaving only the sickly glow of the moon cutting pale streaks through the mountain mist. I approached the aspen with a mix of dread and compulsion, the memory of the red canopy still vivid in my mind. Every step on the pine needle-strewn ground felt like a trespass, as though the soil itself remembered my previous intrusion. The leaves whispered faintly, but this time the sound carried weight, a rolling cadence that reminded me of distant thunder. I stopped at the tree's base, hand resting against the bark, feeling its vibration subtle at first, then growing into a rhythm like a heartbeat multiplied 1,000-fold. The aspen was alive, more than alive, aware of my hesitation, my fear, my very thoughts. Above, the canopy shifted unnaturally. Leaves trembled in unison, producing a sharp, rhythmic rustling that reverberated across the clearing. It was not wind. It was intentional, deliberate, a sound of power, of authority, of judgment. The whispers from the night before had become words, clearer, almost intelligible. You trespass, you observe, you learn. I dared to step closer. The ground beneath me seemed to pulse with the energy of the tree, tiny vibrations against my boots. Every leaf glimmered in the moonlight, some catching faint traces of red, as if the memory of the blood-hued canopy was embedded within them. I could feel the eyes of the aspen on me, countless invisible orbs tracking my movements, measuring my intent. Suddenly, the ground shuddered. Not a tremor of earth, but a subtle shift, a resonance that traveled through my feet into my bones. The whispers swelled into a cacophony, harmonizing into a chant that was both a warning and an incantation. The rustling escalated, louder and sharper, striking like rolling thunder across the forest. I stumbled back, ears ringing, overwhelmed by the intensity, and then I saw them faint shadows moving in the periphery of the clearing, shapes that could have been human or merely echoes of the past. They drifted between the trunks, bending like smoke in a breeze, silent but watchful. The aspen song guided them, or perhaps they were part of it, guardians of the tree's memory, manifestations of its long, unbroken vigilance. I wanted to flee, but my curiosity rooted me to the spot. The rhythmic thunder of leaves was now deafening, a sound that seemed to match my heartbeat. I felt dizzy, as though gravity itself had become erratic, and the air shimmered, thick with anticipation. In the midst of the uproar, a single branch arched down, brushing against my shoulder. The touch was light, almost affectionate, yet beneath it lay a weight. I could not comprehend a message older than any human memory. I caught a glimpse of the forest floor beneath the aspen, faint impressions forming, tiny depressions where the soil appeared to bow under unseen weight. Footsteps? Perhaps, but unlike any I had ever known, rhythmic and deliberate, moving in patterns too precise for a mortal to leave. I realized the tree was recording, communicating, and perhaps judging each soul who came beneath its canopy. Then came the leaves' final crescendo. The rhythmic rustling became a roar, like 1,000 hands clapping in unison. The sound pressed against my chest, stole my breath, rattled my teeth. I dropped to my knees, clinging to the tree, praying for release, for mercy. But the aspen had no intent to harm, only to remind me of its presence, its power, its patience. When the thunder of leaves finally subsided, the forest returned to a strange stillness. The shadows faded, the soil relaxed, and the whispers softened to a quiet hum. I could still feel the pulse of the aspen beneath my palms, slow now, deliberate, alive in a way that defied comprehension. The moonlight reflected off the leaves, revealing faint traces of red again, almost imperceptible, lingering like a memory of what had passed. I stood slowly, trembling, every nerve alive. I understood then that the aspen's warning was more than superstition. It was a covenant. The tree could observe, influence, and shape those who lingered under its boughs. It tested my courage, my resolve, my respect for the boundaries between human curiosity and natural authority. As I backed away from the clearing, I could still hear the faint, echoing cadence of the thunder in my ears, a lingering testament to the aspen's presence. The forest had returned to silence, but I knew it would not forget me. Neither would I ever forget it. And in the depths of my mind, I carried the knowledge that, should I ever doubt the tree's power, the aspen song could awaken again, and I would be compelled to listen. The night was unusually still. Even the crickets had paused, as if they too were listening. I approached the aspen once more, drawn by a mix of dread and a stubborn need to witness what no one else had. The memory of the thunderous leaves from the previous night reverberated in my mind, a sound I could still feel in my chest long after the echoes had faded. Now, under the heavy blackness of the mountain sky, the air seemed almost viscous, pressing against my lungs with a subtle insistence that warned me to turn back, but I did not. Curiosity, and perhaps a foolish sense of duty, carried me forward. Each step through the undergrowth crunched too loudly, breaking the fragile silence, yet nothing stirred. The aspen's trunk loomed ahead, impossibly tall, its branches blending with the black sky. I reached out to touch the bark, running my palm over the rough surface, feeling the tree's heartbeat, faint but unmistakable, like the pulse of a slumbering giant. Then the leaves began. At first, a faint murmur, almost imperceptible, but it grew, a synchronized rustling that rippled through the canopy with precision. I froze. The sound was different now, sharper, almost articulate. I could swear I heard the echoes of voices entwined in the swaying of the branches. Not human voices, no. They were old, primordial, like the forest itself speaking, like countless generations of whispers compressed into one sound. A sudden breeze stirred, but it carried no wind's chill. It was heavier, like the movement of the tree's own lungs. The leaves trembled violently, producing a hollow clap, then another, until the sound was thunderous. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears, overwhelmed by the sheer force of the noise. It wasn't just sound, it was presence, weight, an entity pressing down upon me from every direction. My heart pounded in rhythm with the tree's claps, and I realized with a shock that the aspen could feel me, judge me, and perhaps even punish me for my intrusion. Looking up, I saw them, thousands of faint, whitish shapes moving among the branches, pale as moonlight, each flitting leaf bearing something like eyes, gleaming and unblinking. They stared at me, and I could feel their collective gaze, 1,000 lifetimes of scrutiny, measuring my fear, my resolve, my respect. For a long moment I could not distinguish between leaf and spirit, between whisper and echo. Everything coalesced into a single, overwhelming awareness. The clapping intensified. It was no longer a murmur of warning, it was an ovation, a declaration, a pronouncement from the aspen itself. The sound shook the soil beneath my feet, rattled the nearby rocks, and pressed against my chest with a force that made breathing difficult. I fell backward, scrambling for cover among the smaller trees, but the aspen's presence filled the entire clearing. It was impossible to escape its judgment. Even the night sky seemed part of it. The moon caught in the trembling branches, reflecting off the moving shapes like 1,000 pale eyes watching me. And then, from the shadows at the edge of the clearing, I heard them, faint echoes of the earlier whispers, now clearly forming words. They were soft, syllables drawn from some ancient tongue, yet I understood them. Witness, respect, remember, speak not where the living dare not. My throat tightened, and I realized I could not scream, could not cry. My body felt as though it were part of the aspen now, bound to its rhythm, a participant in the eternal ceremony of its leaves. I thought of my friends from years before, the ones who had mocked the superstition and slept beneath the tree. They had run screaming, hearts racing, but they had not understood. They'd only heard the surface of the sound. I felt it fully, every nuance, every reverberation, every hidden intention folded into the clap of a million leaves. And in that moment, I saw the truth. The aspen was more than a tree. It was a sentinel, a recorder, a judge, a choir of the dead and the living entwined. Its applause was not for celebration, it was acknowledgement, warning, and remembrance. Time lost meaning. Minutes, Hours, perhaps, it was days passed in a blur of tremors, whispers, and rhythmic claps. My knees dug into the soft earth, scraping bark and fallen leaves, but I could not move. I could only listen, forced into the rhythm of the aspen, my mind tethered to the pulse of its centuries. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the sound waned. The leaves stilled, the shadows withdrew, and the pale, blinking eyes retreated into the depths of the canopy. The forest exhaled, a deep, resonant sigh that left me trembling, slick with sweat despite the chill. I could feel my heartbeat returning to normal, my breathing easing, yet the echo of the clapping lingered inside me, an indelible mark upon my mind. I rose slowly, shaking, and stepped back from the trunk. The aspen stood silent now, imposing and eternal, as if nothing had happened. The clearing was still, the night air motionless, but I knew the truth. The aspen's applause would not end. It would wait, patient as ever, for the next trespasser, the next skeptic, the next observer to come too close. It would remember me, the one who dared to witness, and it would remember all who ignored its warnings. I stumbled away from the clearing, every step weighted by the gravity of what I had experienced. The forest around me was calm, but I could feel the pulse of the aspen in the soil beneath my feet, in the sway of distant branches, in the faint rustle that lingered in my ears. The mountains themselves seemed quieter, as if the trees had conspired to guard the secret. I understood, with absolute clarity, that some places are alive with memory, with judgment, with consciousness, and that they were not meant to be fully known by mortal minds. By the time I reached the edge of the aspen grove, dawn was breaking over the distant peaks. The first light touched the trembling leaves, and the clap was gone. Only the gentle rustle remained, a warning softened for those who survived to see the day. My legs carried me down the trail, but my mind remained tethered to the aspen. Every whisper of wind, every flicker of light across the leaves, every faint tremor beneath my boots reminded me that the tree was always listening. Years have passed since that night. I've returned to the mountains, but never so close again. I speak of the aspen only in whispers, and only to those who respect what they cannot comprehend. The memory of its applause follows me still, in the rustle of leaves in my yard, in the sway of a tree in the distance, in the quiet moments when I am alone and the world is still. And I know that one day, if I am careless, if I forget the warning, the aspen will call me back to its clearing, and the applause will resume thunderous, unyielding, eternal. It is a sound I can never forget, a presence I can never escape. The aspen's applause is not a story, it is a law. The night has given up its secrets, for now. Each story has left its mark, a lingering shadow that might follow you home, or simply sit in your thoughts, waiting for a quiet moment to remind you that the world is not as empty as it seems. Remember, some debts cannot be repaid, some places are not meant to be entered, and some whispers should never be heard. Sleep cautiously, wanderer, and let the darkness cradle you until the next story.